This video will help you sleep and relax. But before we begin, I would like to know which city you're from and what time you're watching this. Now, subscribe to the channel, relax, and let's begin. I've been hesitating to share this for years, but I need to put it out there to see if anyone else has experienced something similar. This happened 20 years ago when I was 19, but it still affects me so deeply that I can't even sleep in that room when I visit my parents. I grew up in the suburbs of Ravendale in a pretty normal two-story house with an attic that had been converted into a bedroom, my bedroom. Nothing weird had ever really happened there before that night. I mean, I'd always been what my mom called sensitive. I'd get feelings about places or see things out of the corner of my eye sometimes, but nothing that actually scared me. That Wednesday night started like any other. My parents and younger brother were all asleep downstairs, and I was in my attic bedroom getting ready for bed. It was around 11:30 when I turned off my light and settled in. I remember feeling unusually tired, which was weird because I usually had trouble falling asleep. I had just closed my eyes when this overwhelming feeling washed over me. It's hard to explain, but it was like someone had flipped a switch inside my brain. Suddenly, I felt completely alert and watched. My eyes snapped open, and I had this urgent need to turn my light back on. Not just wanted to, needed to. My hand was shaking as I reached for the lamp. With the light on, I looked around my room. Everything seemed normal. My desk with textbooks stacked on it, my closet door closed, posters on the wall, but something felt so wrong. The air felt heavy, like right before a thunderstorm, but inside my bedroom. I remember checking my phone. It was 11:45. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, trying to convince myself I was being stupid. My bedroom door was closed. I always closed it at night, but suddenly I knew something was coming up the stairs. I could feel it, not hear it, feel it, like how you can sense someone standing behind you without seeing them, but 1,000 times stronger. Whatever it was, it didn't open my door. It came through it. I still can't really describe what happened next without getting shaky. The moment it entered my room, I couldn't move. Not like sleep paralysis, which I'd had before. This was different. This was like every muscle in my body had been switched off. I was completely conscious, completely aware, but completely immobilized. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was cry. I felt tears running down my face, but couldn't wipe them away. The presence in my room was evil. Not like a person who does bad things. This was something else entirely. Pure malevolence. It was like being suddenly dunked in ice water filled with pure hatred. Every cell in my body could feel it. It wasn't just in the room with me. It was all around me, pressing against me, suffocating me. I couldn't see it clearly. It was more like a dark mass, denser than the darkness around it. But it had form, and it moved toward my bed deliberately, like it knew exactly what it was doing and why it was there. When it reached me, I felt a large hand grab my chin. Not a human hand. It was too big, the fingers too long, the grip too strong. It forced my face forward, making me look straight ahead at the wall across from my bed. I remember my neck hurting from how hard it was gripping me. Then, with its other hand, it pushed down on my chest, forcing me flat on my back. What came next? This is the part I've tried for 20 years to fully remember, but it's like my brain won't let me. I know something happened, something terrifying beyond anything I'd ever experienced. The only thing I remember clearly is the sensation of completely losing myself. I didn't know who I was anymore. My name, my family, my life, all gone. It was like my identity had been completely erased, and all that was left was fear. The next thing I remember is sitting upright in my bed, rocking back and forth, staring at my window as the sun started to rise. I had no idea how much time had passed. My light was off, though I never turned it off. My phone was dead. I couldn't move from that position, just rocking, staring, breathing too fast. I heard my parents get up around 6:30. My dad's heavy footsteps in the hallway below. My mom's voice calling to my brother to get ready for school. I heard their cars start, heard them leave, but I still couldn't move. It was like I was still partially paralyzed, but now just from fear. I sat there for hours. The sun rose fully, moved across the sky. I was thirsty, desperately needed to use the bathroom, but couldn't make myself get out of bed. It was like if I moved, whatever had happened would somehow happen again. My mom came home early that day, around 4 in the afternoon. I heard her car in the driveway, heard the front door open. Something about hearing her voice calling out, "I'm home," finally broke whatever was holding me there. I managed to get up, my legs so stiff they barely worked. I made it downstairs somehow, and when I saw my mom standing in the kitchen unpacking groceries, something in me just collapsed. I literally fell to my knees and grabbed her legs, sobbing uncontrollably. I couldn't even speak. She was terrified, kept asking what happened, if someone had hurt me, if I was sick. When I finally managed to calm down enough to talk, I couldn't explain what had happened. Not really. I just kept saying something had been in my room, something had held me down. She thought I'd had a nightmare, but I kept insisting I'd been awake the whole time. She wanted to take me to the hospital, thinking I might have had some kind of seizure or mental break, but I begged her not to. I couldn't face talking to strangers about it. The weirdest thing was my eyes. My pupils were so dilated you could barely see the color. They stayed that way all day. When I looked in the bathroom mirror, I got scared of my own reflection. My eyes looked like black holes. I looked wrong somehow, not like myself. Later that evening, I had plans to meet my friend Jess at a cafe. My mom didn't want me to go, but I insisted I needed to get out of the house. When I met Jess, the first thing she said was, "What's wrong with you? You're freaking me out." She said there was something about me that made her uncomfortable, that she felt scared being near me. Jess, who I'd known since elementary school, actually backed away from me when I tried to hug her. I slept on the couch that night, and the next night, and for the rest of the week until my dad literally carried me up to my room, thinking he was helping me face my fears. I had another breakdown, screaming and fighting until he gave up and let me sleep downstairs. 2 weeks later, I moved out, found a tiny apartment with terrible roommates, just to avoid sleeping in that room again. My parents thought I was being ridiculous, that I'd had a bad dream or maybe a panic attack. They never really understood. 20 years later, I'm married with kids of my own. When we visit my parents, they always offer us my old room to sleep in. I always refuse. My husband used to think it was weird until he saw how I reacted when my dad once tried to insist. My whole body went cold. I started shaking and I couldn't breathe. Now he just backs me up without questions. What bothers me most, even now, is not knowing what it was or why it came for me. Was it something connected to that place, that attic room, or was it something that targeted me specifically? I've spent years researching paranormal experiences, looking for something similar to what happened to me. I've found stories of sleep paralysis, of shadow people, of night terrors, but nothing that exactly matches what I experienced. I still have nightmares where I feel that hand on my chin, forcing me to look straight ahead. I still wake up sometimes feeling like I don't know who I am for a few terrifying seconds, and I still can't sleep with the lights off. The most frightening part is that I know that whatever happened that night, whatever that entity did to me, it isn't finished. There's this constant feeling like it's just waiting for the right moment to return. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I swear I can feel it watching me, waiting for me to let my guard down again. I've never told anyone the full story until now. I guess I'm hoping someone out there might recognize what happened, might have some answers, or maybe I just needed to finally get it out, to see it written down and know that I'm not crazy, that something truly evil found me that night, and somehow I survived it. Story 2. I've always been a rational person. I don't jump at shadows or believe in ghost stories. At least that's what I used to tell myself before the mirror came into my life. Now, I'm not so sure about anything anymore. My name is Emma, and I'm 22 years old. What I'm about to share happened just yesterday, but it feels like I've been living with this presence for much longer. I'm writing this down partly because I need someone to believe me, and partly because I'm terrified of what might happen next. It all started when my mom gave me her antique mirror about 4 months ago. She'd had it for years. Bought it from some little antique shop in Misthaven where we live. It's this massive, ornate thing with a tarnished silver border that has all these weird carvings that look medieval or something. Knights and castles and what might be dragons. I don't know. It's beautiful in a creepy way, I guess. It would look perfect in your room, Mom had said. I've had it long enough. I remember thinking it was weird how eager she seemed to get rid of it, especially since she usually guards her antiques like treasures. But I took it anyway. I needed a full-length mirror for my apartment, and this one had character. The first few weeks were fine. I hung it on my bedroom wall directly across from my bed. I used it every morning for makeup and to check my outfits. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to my reflection, just silly stuff when I was alone. Looking good, Emma. Or, God, your hair's a mess today. Normal stuff, right? But then things started to change. It was subtle at first. I'd be doing my makeup and suddenly get this weird feeling that my reflection wasn't quite synced with me. Like there was this microsecond delay. I'd blink, and my reflection would blink just a hair too late. I chalked it up to being tired from college exams. Then the feeling of being watched started. I'd be alone in my room, but I'd feel like someone was standing right behind me. I'd spin around, heart racing, only to find nobody there, just the mirror reflecting my frightened face back at me. About a month after getting the mirror, I started waking up with these scratches on my legs. Not deep ones, but definitely noticeable, like someone had dragged their fingernails across my skin while I slept. I don't have pets. I clip my nails short. There was no explanation. Yesterday, though, yesterday is why I'm writing this. I woke up early, around 5 in the morning. My room was still dark, but there was this faint blue light coming from somewhere. I realized it was the mirror, not reflecting light, it was generating it, a soft pulsing blue glow. I froze in my bed, unable to move, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. The surface of the mirror looked different, rippling, almost like water, and I swear to God there was a shadow behind the glass, not my reflection. I could see myself still lying in bed from the corner of my eye. This was something else, someone else. I shut my eyes tight, counting to 10, telling myself I was dreaming. When I opened them again, the mirror was normal. No blue light, no rippling, just my terrified reflection staring back at me. I couldn't go back to sleep after that. I got up, got dressed, and drove to my parents' house. I needed to talk to my mom about the mirror. I needed to know if she'd ever experienced anything strange with it. When I got there around 7 in the morning, my dad was already up, making coffee in the kitchen. He looked surprised to see me. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked, pouring me a cup without waiting for an answer. "I need to ask Mom about that mirror she gave me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Something changed in his expression, a tightness around his eyes. "What about it? Have you guys ever noticed anything weird about it?" He set his coffee down slowly. "Like what?" "I don't know. Noises, feelings, anything unusual?" Dad glanced toward the staircase leading upstairs, then lowered his voice. "You know, after you moved out for college, I used to hear footsteps upstairs. In your old room. Middle of the day, middle of the night. Didn't matter, I'd check, and there'd be nobody there. My blood went cold. Why didn't you ever say anything?" He shrugged, but I could tell he was uncomfortable. "Your mother always said old houses make noises." I figured she was right. Mom came downstairs then, still in her robe. She looked between us, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" she asked. "Emma wants to know about the mirror," Dad said. Mom's face went pale, actually pale, like all the blood drained out. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "What's happening?" she asked me, her voice barely above a whisper. I told them everything, the feeling of being watched, the delayed reflections, the scratches on my legs, the blue light, and the shadow behind the glass. With each detail, Mom seemed to shrink further into herself. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "I should never have given it to you," she finally said. I thought it was just me. I thought if it was out of the house, things would stop." "What things?" I demanded. "The knocking on doors when nobody's there, the sound of the shower running when it's off, the blinds moving when there's no wind." She looked up at me, her eyes watery. "Sometimes when I walk past the stairs, I see someone walking across the hallway upstairs, just for a second, then they're gone." "Jesus," I whispered. "Your sister won't come into the house anymore," Dad added. "Haven't you noticed? When she does visit, she never goes upstairs, especially not into your old room." I hadn't noticed, but now that he mentioned it, it was true. The last few times my sister had been over and needed something from my old room, she'd asked me to get it for her. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" I asked, my voice rising. "If you knew something was wrong with the mirror, why give it to me?" "I didn't know it was the mirror," Mom insisted. "Not for sure. Things happened in this house for years, but they got worse after I bought that thing. When you moved out, I thought if I gave it to you, maybe whatever was attached to it would leave us alone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So you gave it to me? Your daughter? I didn't think it would follow you." Mom was crying now. "I thought it was the house, not the mirror. I thought if you had it somewhere else, nothing would happen." I felt sick. "Where did you even get it?" "That little antique shop down on Harbor Street. It closed years ago. The owner said it came from an estate sale, some old family from upstate. She said it was a steal at the price." "I bet it was," I muttered. Dad cleared his throat. "We need to get rid of it." "How?" I asked. "Sell it to some other unsuspecting person? Give it away? What if whatever's attached to it hurts someone else?" Nobody had an answer to that. I went home that afternoon with a plan to research the mirror's history. Maybe if I could figure out where it came from, I could find a way to, I don't know, cleanse it or something. I'm not superstitious, but I was desperate. When I got back to my apartment, I immediately felt it. The heaviness in the air, the sense that something was waiting for me. I went straight to my laptop and started searching for information about antique mirrors from Mist Haven. After a few hours, I found something. A local history forum had a thread about cursed objects of Mist Haven County. Someone had posted about a silver-framed mirror that had supposedly belonged to a family named Caldwell in the 1930s. According to the post, 3 members of the family died under mysterious circumstances while the mirror was in their possession. After the last death, the mirror disappeared from public record for decades. The post included a grainy black and white photo. Even through the poor quality, I recognized the distinctive border of my mirror. I kept digging. The mirror appeared again in an estate sale listing from 1987, then again in a police report from 1987-1992. Something about a domestic disturbance where a woman claimed something came out of her mirror and attacked her husband. They were both admitted to psychiatric care and their property was sold off. That must have been when the antique shop acquired it, and then my mother bought it. By the time I finished reading, it was dark outside. I hadn't turned on any lights, and my apartment was bathed in the blue glow of my laptop screen. I became aware of a faint tapping sound coming from my bedroom. Tap, 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 like fingernails on glass. I didn't want to go in there. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to grab my keys and get out of the apartment, but something pulled me toward my bedroom door, a compulsion I couldn't fight. The tapping got louder as I approached. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. The door swung open on its own. The The mirror was glowing that same blue light I'd seen in the morning. The surface rippled and bulged like something was pressing against it from the other side, and there was my reflection, except it wasn't mirroring my movements. I was standing in the doorway, but my reflection was sitting on the edge of my bed, smiling at me. It lifted a finger to its lips. Shh. Then it pointed to the space beside it on the bed, an invitation. I backed away, stumbling over my own feet. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a sound like water draining. The surface of the mirror bulged further, a hand pressing through. My hand, but not my hand. The fingers were too long, the nails sharp like claws. I ran, grabbed my keys and phone, and ran out of my apartment without looking back. I'm at a motel now, writing this. I don't know what to do. I can't go back there, but I can't leave that thing for someone else to find. The worst part? When I got to the motel and looked at my phone, I had a text from my mom. "Don't go in your room. Your sister just told me why she won't come upstairs at our house. She saw something coming out of the mirror in your old room the last time she visited. She thought she was hallucinating. She wasn't. We're coming to get you. Stay away from any mirrors." But it's too late. I think whatever was in that mirror is out now, and I think it looks like me. I keep checking my legs under the table. The scratches from this morning have gotten deeper. They're forming patterns now. Words, maybe. I can't make them out yet. I don't know what's going to happen next. I just know that my reflection isn't just my reflection anymore. And I'm afraid of what happens when the sun goes down again. Story 3. I still don't know how to explain what happened to me last year. I've tried talking to my therapist about it, but she just says it was stress from college. My boyfriend believes me though. He was there for the nightmares. This all happened in the fall of 2019, when I was still living with my mom and younger brother in this small apartment complex in rural Minnesota. It wasn't much, but it was home. A basic 2-bedroom place on the second floor. Our apartment faced these massive cornfields across the street. There weren't any streetlights on that road, so when night fell, it was just pitch black out there. I was in my junior year at the community college, studying music education. Most nights I'd practice piano after everyone went to bed. My mom worked early mornings, and my brother was in high school, so they'd usually be asleep by 10. I've always been a night owl, and playing piano helped me unwind. That night in October, I remember it was unseasonably cold. The windows were getting that foggy condensation on the corners, but I kept the one by my keyboard cracked open because I liked the fresh air while I played. It was around midnight, and I was working on this Chopin piece for my recital. I'd been playing for maybe an hour when I noticed something move near the edge of the cornfield. At first I thought it was just the wind blowing through the stalks, but when I looked closer, I could make out what looked like a black goat poking its head out from between the corn. It wasn't that weird to see farm animals. We lived in farm country after all. There was a dairy farm about half a mile down the road, though I'd never seen them keep goats. I figured maybe it had gotten loose, so I just went back to playing. A few minutes later, I glanced back out and froze. The goat wasn't at the edge of the field anymore. It was standing in the middle of the street, perfectly still, facing our apartment building. Now, I know how this sounds, but it felt like it was looking right at me. I couldn't see its eyes from that distance, but its head was tilted up toward my window. I remember feeling this sudden chill that had nothing to do with the open window. I should mention that earlier that night, my boyfriend and I had watched some stupid horror movie about witches or something, so my imagination was probably running wild. I told myself to stop being ridiculous and close the window, drawing the curtains shut. I tried to keep practicing, but I couldn't focus anymore. Every few seconds, I'd wonder if the goat was still there or if it had moved closer. After about 10 minutes of this, I gave up and went to bed, putting in my earbuds and playing music to drown out my thoughts. I must have dozed off for about an hour before waking up suddenly. You know that feeling when you just sense something's wrong? That's what happened. I pulled out my earbuds and listened, but the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. Curiosity got the better of me. I had to check if the goat was still out there. I crept over to my window and carefully pulled back the curtain just enough to peek out. My heart nearly stopped. The goat wasn't in the street anymore. It was on our apartment building's front lawn, directly below my window, standing under the illuminated apartment sign. And that's when I saw them. Its feet. Except they weren't hooves. In the yellowish glow from our building sign, I could clearly see that this thing had hands. Not paws, not hooves, actual hands. They were gnarled and twisted with long, skinny fingers that seemed too long for its body. They looked almost human, but wrong somehow. The joints bent at unnatural angles, and the skin seemed mottled and dark. I let the curtain fall back immediately and stumbled away from the window. I couldn't breathe right. My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab my phone to check the time. It was just after 1 in the morning. I didn't want to wake my mom or brother. What would I even say? Hey, there's a goat with human hands outside our apartment. They'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. There was no way I was staying in my room, though. I grabbed my blanket and pillow and went to sleep on the living room couch, as far from the windows as possible. I turned on the TV for background noise and eventually fell into this fitful, anxiety-ridden sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my mom was already gone for work and my brother was getting ready for school. He asked why I was on the couch, and I made up some excuse about falling asleep watching TV. After he left, I forced myself to go back to my room. In the daylight, with people moving around outside and traffic on the street, the whole thing seemed absurd. Maybe I dreamed it all, or my eyes had played tricks on me in the dark. But then I looked at my window. There, on the outside of the glass, about halfway up, was a handprint. Not a smudge, not dirt. A distinct, greasy handprint with long fingers, and stuck to it were several coarse black hairs. On my second-floor window, I called in sick to my classes and spent the whole day cleaning that window with bleach. I scrubbed it until my hands were raw, but I swear I could still see a faint outline of that print even after I was done. I didn't tell anyone what happened, not right away. I was afraid they'd think I was losing it. Instead, I called my boyfriend and asked if I could stay at his place for a few days. I made up some story about my mom and brother having the flu, and I didn't want to catch it before my recital. I never practiced piano near that window again. In fact, I avoided my room as much as possible, only going in to grab clothes or books when I needed them. I started spending more and more time at my boyfriend's apartment until eventually, about 3 weeks later, I just moved in with him. I thought putting some distance between me and that place would help. For a while it did. I stopped jumping at every shadow and could actually sleep through the night again. Then the nightmares started. At first, they were vague. Just feelings of being watched, or glimpses of something dark moving at the edge of my vision. But they got more intense and vivid as time went on. In one dream, I was back in my old apartment playing piano, but when I looked out the window, the cornfield had been replaced by a dark forest. And standing at the tree line was the goat, watching me, just watching. In another, I was walking through a grocery store doing normal shopping, when I noticed the goat at the end of every aisle I turned down, always facing me with those hands hanging at its sides. The worst one happened about a month ago. In this dream, I was in what looked like Salem during colonial times. I was wearing this heavy Puritan dress and walking on a dirt path toward a village. I remember feeling scared in the dream, like I was being led somewhere I didn't want to go. As I walked, I kept glancing over my shoulder at the woods that lined the path. And there it was, the goat, partially hidden behind a tree, those twisted hands gripping the bark as it watched me. But the truly terrifying part was that in the dream, I somehow knew this wasn't the first time this had happened. I had this overwhelming sense that the goat and I had been doing this same dance for centuries. My boyfriend said I was twitching violently in my sleep during that nightmare. He had to shake me awake because I was making these horrible whimpering sounds. I haven't seen the goat in person since that night at my mom's apartment, but I still get this crawling sensation on the back of my neck sometimes, especially at night, like something's watching me from just outside my field of vision. Last week I was driving home from a late class, and I had to pass by my old apartment building. The cornfield across the street had been harvested for the season, leaving just stubble in the dirt. As I drove by, I glanced over. Just a quick look. Something dark moved between the rows of corn stubble, just for a second, just enough to make me floor the accelerator and run a stop sign getting away from there. I've looked up local folklore, cryptids, anything that might explain what I saw. The closest I've found are stories about skinwalkers or the devil appearing as a goat, but neither quite matches what I experienced. My mom and brother still live in that apartment. They haven't noticed anything strange, or at least they haven't mentioned it. Sometimes I wonder if it was just there for me, and if so, why? I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened that night. All I know is that I can't look at goats anymore without checking for hooves, and I always keep my curtains closed after dark. Sometimes I wonder if moving away was what it wanted all along, like it was pushing me towards something or away from something. The nightmares have been less frequent lately, but they haven't stopped completely. And sometimes when I'm practicing piano at school now, I'll get this overwhelming urge to look out the window. I never do. I don't know what that thing was or what it wanted from me, but those hands, those twisted, gnarled hands with fingers too long and joints bent wrong, I'll never forget them, or the way they looked pressed against my second-story window, leaving behind that greasy print with black hairs stuck to it. All I know is that something was out there watching me, and sometimes I think it still is. Story 4. I've hesitated to share this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar or can help me make sense of what happened. 3 months ago, I visited Poland with my university history group. I'm a history major, and our professor organized this educational trip to various W-Trig sites. The main destination was Auschwitz-Birkenau, which I'd studied extensively, but never visited in person. I thought I was prepared for the emotional weight of it. I wasn't. The day started normally enough. We arrived at the memorial site around 10 in the morning. It was April and the weather was overcast but not raining, just a typical grey Polish spring day. The air felt heavy with moisture, but nothing unusual. Our group of 15 students plus our professor gathered at the entrance, where we were assigned a guide who would take us through the camp. I remember standing at the infamous Arbeit macht frei gate, waiting for everyone to get their audio headsets adjusted. That's when it first happened. The moment I stepped through that gate, and I mean the exact moment my foot crossed that threshold, something changed. It felt like someone had draped a heavy, wet blanket over my shoulders. The weight was so sudden and distinct that I actually reached up to check if something had fallen on me. My ears started ringing too, not loudly but persistently, like when you've been to a loud concert. It created this bubble effect around me, where everything seemed slightly muffled and distant. I figured it was just the emotional impact of being there, so I tried to shake it off and focus on our guide. The first thing that struck me was how quiet the place was. I mean, there were other tour groups around, but the sound seemed to get swallowed up somehow. Even when people talked, their voices didn't carry the way they should have. It was as if the air itself was thick and absorbed sound. I remember thinking how strange it was that birds weren't singing. You always hear birds, right? But not there. Not a single chirp the entire time. We moved through the exhibits in the first building, looking at the displays of personal belongings, shoes, suitcases, eyeglasses, mountains of them. The guide explained how the Nazis had catalogued and stored everything. I was listening through my headset, trying to focus, when I first heard it. At first, I thought there was interference in the audio system, a soft crying sound, like someone was sobbing quietly in another room. I adjusted my headset, thinking maybe I was picking up another frequency or guide's microphone, but the crying continued, and then I heard what sounded like hushed voices speaking rapidly in a language I couldn't understand. I looked around at my classmates, but nobody else seemed to notice anything unusual. They were all solemnly observing the exhibits, listening to our guide. I took off my headset completely, thinking that would stop the sounds. It didn't. The crying was clearer now, definitely a woman's voice, sometimes joined by what sounded like children. The sobbing was coming from somewhere deeper in the building, or maybe from the walls themselves. I can't explain how terrifying it was to realize that removing my headset hadn't stopped the sounds. I must have looked distressed because my professor came over and asked if I was okay. I put my headset back on quickly and nodded, not wanting to seem crazy. How could I explain what I was hearing when no one else seemed to notice? But as we continued through the exhibits, the voices and crying persisted, sometimes fading, sometimes getting louder, but always there beneath the guide's explanation. In the block where they displayed the women's hair, it got worse. The crying became more distinct. Multiple voices now, some wailing, some whimpering. I kept looking around, convinced that someone else must hear it too, but everyone's faces showed only the solemn respect you'd expect, not the growing panic I was feeling. During the brief breaks between buildings, the sounds would fade slightly, only to return stronger when we entered the next structure. By the time we reached the punishment cells, I was drenched in cold sweat. The weight on my shoulders had increased to the point where I felt like I was carrying someone on my back. The crying here was accompanied by what sounded like faint screaming from far away. I remember standing in front of the starvation cell where Father Maximilian Kolbe died, and the voices suddenly intensified so much that I had to step back. It felt like they were right next to my ear, pleading for something. I couldn't understand the words, but the desperation was unmistakable. One of my classmates noticed me swaying slightly and asked if I needed air. I nodded gratefully and stepped outside for a moment, hoping the sounds would stop once I left the building. They didn't. Even in the open air I could hear them, though they were more distant now. I rejoined the group, trying to breathe normally and focus on our guide. I didn't want to miss the educational aspect of the tour, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to concentrate. As we moved through the camp, past the execution wall and through the various blocks, the pattern continued. The sounds were always there, sometimes receding to background whispers, sometimes surging forward in heart-rending sobs. I started to distinguish different voices, an older woman's low moans, a younger woman's quick, panicked breathing, children's high-pitched cries. Then we approached the most dreaded part of the tour, the gas chambers and crematorium. As we neared the building, something strange happened. The voices and crying, which had been my constant companions for the past few hours, suddenly stopped. The silence was so abrupt that I almost gasped out loud. The weight on my shoulders remained, heavier than ever, but the sounds had completely vanished. The gas chamber itself was possibly the most oppressive space I've ever entered. The air felt thick and stagnant, as if it hadn't moved in decades. The walls seemed to press inward, and the ceiling felt lower than it actually was, but it was completely, utterly silent. Not even the ringing in my ears remained. Our guide explained the process of how people were killed there, pointing out the scratches on the walls where victims had desperately clawed as they died. I stood there, unable to move, feeling like I couldn't breathe properly. The silence was somehow worse than the cries had been. It was as if even the spirits couldn't bear to remain in this place of their final suffering. The crematorium was the same, heavy, pressing silence. I remember staring at the ovens and feeling like I might pass out. The world seemed to narrow to a pinpoint, and I had to focus on my breathing to avoid collapsing. When we finally exited and made our way toward the camp exit, I expected the voices to return. They didn't. The silence persisted, but the weight remained, growing heavier with each step. By the time we reached the main gate again, I felt like I was moving through molasses, each step requiring conscious effort. As we passed back through the Arbeit macht frei gate to leave, the strangest thing happened. The weight suddenly lifted, like someone had cut puppet strings, but was immediately replaced by the most excruciating headache I've ever experienced. It wasn't like a normal headache that concentrates in one area. This was a perfect ring of pressure and pain that encircled my entire head, as if someone had placed a metal band around my skull and was slowly tightening it. I rarely get headaches, only during times of extreme stress or emotional trauma. But this was different. This felt external, imposed, like it wasn't coming from within me at all. On the bus back to our hotel, I couldn't speak. My classmates assumed I was just emotionally affected by the visit, which was true, but not in the way they thought. The headache persisted all evening and into the night. I took painkillers, but they barely touched it. I lay in my hotel room, the ring of pain throbbing around my head, replaying the sounds I'd heard. The most unsettling part? 2 weeks before the trip, I'd visited a psychic with some friends as a birthday celebration thing. I don't usually believe in that stuff, but she singled me out from the group and told me I had what she called sensitive abilities. She said I could perceive things others couldn't, especially emotional imprints left behind in places of great suffering. I'd laughed it off at the time. I'm not laughing anymore. The headache finally subsided after about 24 hours. I never told my professor or classmates what happened. How could I explain it without sounding completely unhinged? But I know what I experienced. Those voices, those cries, they were real. Not physically real, perhaps, but real in some way I can't fully articulate. It's been 3 months, and I still wake up sometimes thinking I can hear those faint cries. The experience has changed me fundamentally. I've started researching similar experiences at other concentration camps and memorial sites, and I've found I'm not alone. Other people have reported unexplainable phenomena at these places: sudden cold spots, disembodied voices, overwhelming feelings of dread or sadness. I don't know if what I experienced were actual ghosts or just some kind of energy imprint left behind by the unimaginable suffering that occurred there. I don't know why I could hear them when others couldn't, and I don't know why they fell silent at the gas chambers. Was it too painful even for spirits to revisit, or was the silence itself a different kind of manifestation of their pain? All I know is that Auschwitz isn't just a historical site or a memorial. Something remains there, something that can reach out and touch the living, something that wants to be heard, and sometimes, whether we want to or not, some of us can hear it. Story 5. I've never told this story to anyone outside my childhood friends who were there that night. Even after all these years, I still get goosebumps thinking about it. It happened in 1993, just a few years after communism fell in Poland. I was 9 years old then, living in one of those grey, concrete apartment blocks that were everywhere in our town. Our building had 8 floors with 4 apartments on each level. It wasn't fancy by any means, but it was home. The walls were thin enough that you could hear your neighbors arguing, and the plumbing made strange noises at night. Most families had lived there for decades, including mine. My parents worked long hours at the factory, so my older brother Tomek, he was 12, was usually in charge of watching me after school. The basement of our building was this maze of narrow corridors with small storage units for each apartment. Every family had their own little cage-like room with a padlock where they kept preserves, potatoes, old furniture, and whatever else wouldn't fit in the cramped apartments above. The lighting down there was terrible. Just a few bare bulbs hanging from wires that cast these long, creepy shadows everywhere. During summer break that year, there wasn't much for us kids to do. No internet, barely any TV channels, and our parents couldn't afford to send us to summer camps. So we made our own fun. There were about 8 of us from the building who hung out together. Me, my brother Tomek, the twins Ania and Kasia who lived on the 6th floor, Wojtek from the 4th floor, Piotr and Zosia from the 1st floor, and Janek who lived across from us. One particularly hot afternoon in July, we were bored out of our minds. Our usual games had gotten stale, and it was too hot to play outside. That's when Wojtek suggested we play hide and seek in the basement. It seemed like a brilliant idea at the time. The basement was cool, dark, and full of perfect hiding spots. The first few games were normal enough. We'd count to 30 while one person hid. Then we'd search through the dimly lit corridors trying to find them. But after an hour or so, Janek, always the daredevil, suggested we make it more exciting by turning off the lights completely. It'll be way more fun in the dark, he insisted. We're not babies anymore. I remember feeling nervous about the idea, but I didn't want to seem scared in front of the others, especially my brother, so I agreed along with everyone else. Tomek volunteered to be it first, and we all watched as he flipped the main switch by the entrance, plunging the basement into complete darkness. The darkness down there wasn't like the darkness in your bedroom at night. It was absolute. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The only tiny bits of light came from the small ventilation windows near the ceiling, but they were so dirty and small they barely helped at all. We scattered, giggling and bumping into walls as we felt our way around. I found a spot behind some old furniture in one of the storage units whose lock had broken long ago. The concrete floor was cold against my legs as I crouched there, trying to control my breathing so Tomek wouldn't hear me. Time passed differently in that darkness. What felt like hours was probably only minutes. I could hear distant shuffling as the others moved around, trying to find better hiding spots or avoid being caught. The basement had this smell, a mixture of damp concrete, old potatoes, and something else I could never quite identify. Then everything changed. I heard Anya scream first, a genuine scream of fear, not the playful kind when someone gets found in hide and seek. Then came shouts from the others and the sound of kids running toward the exit. My heart started racing, and I stood up, disoriented in the blackness. "Turn on the lights," someone yelled. There's a man down here." That was Kasia's voice. I started moving toward where I thought the exit was, my hands stretched out in front of me. That's when I heard it, heavy footsteps that definitely didn't belong to any of us kids. And then a deep voice shouted something I couldn't make out, but the tone was angry. My blood went cold. I knew we weren't supposed to be playing in the basement, especially not after dinner time. Parents in our building were strict, and disturbing neighbors could get us all in serious trouble. I assumed it was Mr. Nowak from the second floor. He was always complaining about noise. I heard the basement door slam shut, followed by the sound of the lock clicking. Panic washed over me as I realized they had locked the door, with me still inside. "Hey," I shouted. "I'm still here. Don't lock it." But my voice just echoed off the concrete walls. Either they couldn't hear me, or in their panic, they didn't realize I was missing. I stood frozen, suddenly aware that I wasn't alone in the darkness. Those heavy footsteps were still there, moving slowly through the corridors. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Mr. Nowak, I'm sorry we were making noise. I'm leaving now." No response, just more footsteps, coming closer. I backed up until I hit a wall, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to remember the layout of the basement, to figure out where the exit was from my position, but in the complete darkness, I was disoriented. The footsteps stopped. I could sense something, standing just a few meters away from me. I couldn't see them, but I could feel their presence like a cold spot in the air. Then came a sound that still haunts my nightmares, a strange rattling breath that no living person could make. I screamed my brother's name, over and over. "Tomek, help me, I'm still down here, Tomek." The thing moved closer. I could feel it. The air grew colder, and that rattling breath got louder. I pressed myself against the wall, wishing I could just melt through it. That's when I heard banging on one of the small basement windows. It was Tomek's voice. "Marek, are you in there? Come to the window by the bikes." I knew the window he meant. It was near where the building residents kept their bicycles chained up. I started moving toward his voice, keeping one hand on the wall to guide me. The footsteps behind me quickened. I ran then, bumping into walls and storage cages, scraping my knees and hands. The thing was following me. I could hear it moving faster too, that horrible breathing getting closer. I tripped over something and fell hard, smacking my head against the concrete floor. For a second, I saw stars in the darkness. As I scrambled to my feet, my hand touched something cold and metal, a bicycle handle. I was near the window. I could see it now, a faint square of evening light high up on the wall. Tomek's face was pressed against it, his features distorted by the dirty glass. "Hurry!" he shouted. "Climb up on the bikes!" I jumped on top of the pile of bicycles, their frames clattering under my weight. As I reached for the window, I felt something grab at my ankle. Cold fingers wrapping around my skin. I kicked wildly and broke free, then pushed against the window with all my strength. It was stuck. Years of paint had sealed it shut. Tomek was pushing from the outside while I pushed from inside. Behind me, I could hear the thing climbing over the bicycles, that rattling breath so close now I could feel it on my neck. With a crack, the window finally gave way. It was small, meant for ventilation, not escape, but I was skinny enough to fit. Tomek grabbed my wrists and pulled while I kicked and squirmed my way through the opening. As my legs cleared the window, I felt those cold fingers grab at my shoe one last time before I tumbled onto the grass outside. The other kids were standing in a circle, wide-eyed and pale. None of us spoke as Tomek helped me up. We moved away from the building, out to the playground where the streetlights were already on. Only then did we start talking, all at once. "Did you see him? Who was that? Why was he down there? We should tell our parents." Wojtek, who lived in the building longest, was the most confused. "There's no other way out of the basement except that door," he said, pointing to the entrance we'd locked. "We've been standing here the whole time. Nobody came out?" We waited for nearly an hour, expecting to see some angry neighbor emerge, ready to scold us for playing where we shouldn't. But no one came out. When we finally worked up the courage to go back inside the building, we found Piotr's grandfather in the lobby. He took one look at our faces and asked what had happened. Piotr blurted out the whole story while the rest of us nodded along. I expected him to laugh, to tell us we were imagining things or playing tricks on each other. Instead, his face grew serious. He sat us down on the bench by the mailboxes and looked around to make sure no one else was listening. "Listen to me," he said in a low voice. 15 years ago, before some of you were even born, there was a man who lived on the 3rd floor, Pan Kowalski. He lost his job when the factory cut workers, and his wife left him. Piotr's grandfather paused, considering how much to tell us. "He went down to the basement one night and hung himself from one of the pipes, right by where you keep your bicycles." A chill ran down my spine. That was exactly where I'd felt those cold fingers grab me. "But that's not possible," Tomek said. "We saw someone, a real person." Piotr's grandfather shook his head. "What you saw was a Zoe, a phantom. They appear in places where someone died in pain or anger. They're trapped there, repeating their last moments." He looked at each of us in turn. "You must not speak of this again. Talking about them only makes them stronger. They feed on fear and attention." That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in our apartment made me jump. I kept thinking about that rattling breath, those cold fingers on my ankle. My parents noticed something was wrong, but when they asked, I remembered Piotr's grandfather's warning and said nothing. The next day, we learned that both locks on the basement door had been malfunctioning. The inside handle couldn't turn, and the outside lock was jammed. The building supervisor had to break it open. No one was found inside. We never played in the basement again. In fact, most of us avoided going down there entirely, making our parents fetch things from storage when needed. Whenever we passed the basement door, we'd walk a little faster, sometimes making the sign of the cross like our grandmothers taught us. Years passed, and eventually I moved away from that building, away from our town, and finally away from Poland altogether. But I've never forgotten what happened that summer evening. Sometimes, when I'm alone in a dark room, I imagine I hear that rattling breath again. I know now that Pan Kowalski wasn't angry at us for making noise. He was trapped, not just in that basement, but in the moment of his death, startling intruders in the dark place where his life ended. And sometimes I wonder if he's still there, waiting in the shadows, reaching out with cold fingers for the next child who dares to play hide-and-seek in the dark. Story 6. I should probably mention that this wasn't my first experience with whatever you want to call them, ghosts, spirits, entities, I don't know. When I was 7 and we were living in North Carolina, I had this friend named Wyatt who would visit me. My parents thought he was imaginary, but he wasn't. He was a little boy who had died in our house in the 1920s. I knew details about him that a 7-year-old shouldn't have known. Eventually, my parents realized something wasn't right when I started telling them things about the house's history that I couldn't possibly have known. But Wyatt was nothing compared to what was waiting for us in that house in Vale. The activity started almost immediately after we moved in. The first night, I woke up around midnight to the sound of chains dragging across the floor. Not light chains either. Heavy ones, like the kind you'd use to anchor a ship. They started in the basement, then you could hear them being dragged up the stairs across the second floor, and they always stopped right outside my bedroom door. Every single night. My parents said it was the pipes or the house settling, but I knew better. Houses don't make sounds like metal chains being dragged across hardwood floors. That was just the beginning. About a week after we moved in, I started seeing a little girl in my closet. She never spoke, just stood there staring at me with these hollow eyes. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and she'd be standing at the foot of my bed. I'd pull the covers over my head and count to 100, and when I looked again, she'd be gone. There was also a family, a man, woman, and 2 children, who would sometimes be standing in the corner of my room. They wore clothes like from old photographs, like homesteaders or pioneers. They never moved or spoke, just stood there watching me. Sometimes I'd see them in other parts of the house too, especially in the kitchen. The most unnerving were the indigenous people who would appear randomly throughout the house, sometimes just one, sometimes a small group. They would walk through walls like they didn't exist. I'd see them most often near the living room windows, looking outside as if the house wasn't even there and they were watching the land. My brothers, I have 2 older brothers, Jack, who was 15, and Michael, who was 13. They teased me constantly about being scared. They called me a baby and said I was making it all up for attention. My parents were a little more understanding, but I could tell they thought it was just an overactive imagination. They'd say things like, "Lee, houses make noises, especially old ones," or "It's just shadows from the tree branches." But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear what I heard. The worst day, the day I still have nightmares about, was in November, about 3 months after we moved in. My brothers had a band concert at their school. My mom was running late coming home from work, and my dad was out of town on business. The concert started at 7, and by 6:30 my mom still wasn't home. Jack and Michael were getting anxious. They'd been practicing for weeks, and Jack had a solo. They kept looking at the clock, then at each other, then at me. "We have to go," Jack finally said. "Mom will be home any minute. You'll be fine by yourself for like 10 minutes. I begged them not to leave me. I was literally in tears, pleading with them. "Please don't leave me alone here. Please, something bad will happen." Michael rolled his eyes. "Nothing bad is going to happen. You're 9, not 5. Just watch TV until Mom gets home." "I'm scared," I whispered. "The house doesn't like me." "Houses don't like or dislike people," Jack said, grabbing his trumpet case. "They're just houses." "This one's different," I insisted. "You know it is. You've heard the chains." They both got quiet for a second, and I thought maybe they were going to stay. But then Jack shook his head. "That's just the radiator. We'll be back with Mom right after the concert. An hour, tops." And they left. They just left me there, in that house, alone. At first, I tried to be brave. I turned the TV up loud and sat on the couch with all the lights on. I kept telling myself that my mom would be home any minute. But minutes passed and she didn't come. Around 7:15, I heard it. A little girl giggling upstairs, not like my brothers playing a joke before they left. This was different. It echoed in a way that didn't sound right, like it was coming through water or something. I turned the TV up louder, but somehow the giggling still cut through. Then it stopped, and for a second I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But then I heard something worse, the chains. They never started this early. They always waited until midnight. But there they were, rattling in the basement. I could hear them being dragged across the concrete floor, then the distinct sound of them being pulled up the basement stairs, one heavy link at a time. Clank, clank, clank. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just sat there on the couch, remote clutched in my hand as the chains made their way into the first floor of the house. The TV suddenly changed channels by itself. It had been on Nickelodeon, but now it was flipping rapidly through channels, stopping on static, then flipping again. The volume kept going up and down, up and down. The chains were in the living room now. I could hear them dragging across the floor behind the couch where I was sitting. I still couldn't move. It was like my body wasn't mine anymore. Then the temperature dropped. It was November in Oregon, so it was already cold outside, but this was different. This was like being shoved into a freezer. I could see my breath in front of my face. The windows started to frost over from the inside. The little girl's giggle came again, but this time it was right behind me. Right behind me. I felt something cold touch the back of my neck, like tiny frozen fingers. That broke the spell. I screamed and bolted for the front door. I didn't grab a coat, didn't put on shoes, I just ran. I burst out the front door and sat on the steps, shaking and crying in the cold. I was too terrified to go back inside, but also scared to leave the property in case my mom came home and couldn't find me. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough that my toes and fingers were numb from the cold. Eventually, Mrs. Patterson from next door saw me sitting there and came over. "Lee, what on earth are you doing out here without a coat? Where are your parents?" I couldn't even speak. I just pointed at the house and shook my head. She must have seen something in my face because she didn't ask any more questions. She just took me to her house and wrapped me in a blanket. My mom showed up at Mrs. Patterson's about 20 minutes later, frantic. Her car had broken down, and she'd been trying to get hold of my brothers to let them know she'd be late. When she found out they'd left me alone, she was furious. We went back to our house together. The moment we walked in, everything seemed normal. The TV was on Nickelodeon. The house was warm. There were no chains, no giggling, no indigenous people standing by the windows. But I knew what I'd experienced. When my brothers got home from their concert, they found Mom waiting for them, still in her coat, with me huddled against her. She laid into them like I'd never seen before. "You never leave your sister alone in this house. Do you understand me?" Never. They started to protest, but then they looked at my face. I don't know what they saw there, but whatever it was, it shut them up. Jack just nodded and said, "Okay, Mom, we're sorry, Lee. We won't do it again." And they never did. Not once in the 3 years we lived in that house did they ever leave me alone there again. Sometimes I'd catch them looking at the basement door or staring at the corners of rooms like they were expecting to see something. They never admitted to experiencing anything themselves, but they never questioned me about it again either. We moved away when I was 12. My dad got another transfer, and we were all relieved to leave that house behind. But sometimes, even now, I'll wake up at midnight to the sound of chains dragging across a floor. I'll open my eyes, expecting to see that little girl standing at the foot of my bed, or the homesteader family watching from the corner. The rational part of my brain knows they're not there, but another part of me, the part that sat frozen on that couch while something with cold fingers touched the back of my neck, that part knows they're real. And that part of me wonders if they're still in that avocado green Victorian in Vale, waiting for the next family to move in. I've looked the house up online a few times. It's been sold 3 times since we lived there. No family has stayed longer than 2 years. I still don't know what was in that house or why there were so many different entities. It was like the house was a crossroads where spirits from different times could exist together. I don't know why they focused on me or what they wanted. All I know is that I'm never going back to Vale, Oregon. And if you ever find yourself looking at houses there and come across an old Victorian painted avocado green, keep driving. No matter how good the price is, it's not worth it. Trust me. Story 7. I still get chills thinking about what happened to me 3 years ago. I was 17 at the time, a junior in high school, living with my parents in Northridge's historic district. Our house was this big Victorian-style place built in the 1920s. Beautiful, but also kind of creepy with its creaky floorboards and old plumbing that made weird noises at night. This particular Friday night, my parents were going to some charity dinner with friends from Dad's work. They'd been planning it for weeks, and I was actually looking forward to having the house to myself. Video games, movies, no one telling me to turn down my music. You know, typical teenage freedom stuff. "We'll be back around midnight," Mom told me as she was putting on her earrings. "Emergency numbers are on the fridge. Don't forget to lock up." "I know, Mom. I've stayed home alone before," I replied, already scrolling through my phone. Dad patted my shoulder. "Just be careful, Ryan. Call us if you need anything." After they left, I decided to grab some dinner. I didn't feel like cooking, so I walked down to the subway about 3 blocks away. It was already getting dark, around 6:30 in the evening. October in Northridge gets dark early, and there was this fog rolling in that made everything look kinda hazy under the streetlights. I got back home around 7:15, locked the door behind me and settled on the couch with my foot-long Italian BMTI, turned on Netflix and started watching this horror movie I'd been wanting to see. Yeah, I know, probably not the smartest choice when you're home alone, but I wasn't really scared. I'd seen plenty of horror movies before. Around 8:30 I had just finished my sandwich when I heard something. It sounded like light footsteps coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. These old houses make all kinds of noises. But then I heard it again, more distinctly this time. It sounded like someone walking slowly across the floor of my parents' bedroom, which was directly above the living room. I grabbed the remote and hit pause. The house went completely silent. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. After about 30 seconds, I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me after watching that stupid horror movie. I turned the volume back up and tried to focus on the film, but 10 minutes later I heard it again. This time I was sure. Light footsteps moving from my parents' room toward the hallway. My heart started racing. I muted the TV again and listened. The footsteps stopped as soon as the house went quiet. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound confident but hearing the shake in my voice. "Is someone there?" No response. Just silence. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wind outside making the house creak. Maybe it was the pipes. Maybe the neighbors were making noise and it was carrying through the walls. But none of those explanations felt right. I decided I needed to check it out. Not because I was brave, I was absolutely terrified, but because not knowing was worse than facing whatever was up there. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the drawer. It was the biggest one we had, the one my dad used to carve Thanksgiving turkey. Holding it made me feel slightly better, but my hands were still shaking. I turned on every light as I moved through the house. The staircase seemed longer than usual as I slowly made my way up, knife clutched tightly in my right hand, left hand sliding along the banister. Each step creaked under my weight, and I winced at every sound. When I reached the top of the stairs, I paused and listened again. Nothing. The upstairs hallway stretched before me, doors to the 3 bedrooms and bathroom all closed. My bedroom was at the far end. My parents' room was the first door on the right, and the guest bedroom was across from theirs. I checked my parents' room first, flipping on the light and looking around. Everything was normal. Bed made neatly, Dad's reading glasses on the nightstand, Mom's slippers by the closet. I checked under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains. Nothing. I did the same in the guest room and bathroom. Everything was exactly as it should be. Finally, I checked my own room, my unmade bed, desk cluttered with school stuff, gaming setup in the corner, all normal, no sign that anyone had been in there. I felt relief wash over me, but also felt kind of stupid. Of course there was nobody in the house. I'd locked all the doors and windows before my parents left. I was letting my imagination run wild. To be sure, I went back downstairs and double-checked every door and window, all locked. I even checked the basement door, which we rarely used, also locked. The house was completely secure. I put the knife back in the kitchen but kept all the lights on. I decided to watch TV in my room instead of the living room. Somehow being upstairs felt safer now that I'd checked everything. I grabbed some chips and a soda from the kitchen and headed back upstairs. I settled onto my bed, propped up some pillows, and turned on my TV. I switched to a comedy show. Definitely no more horror for the night. Around 9:30 I started feeling better. The house was quiet except for the TV, and I was getting sleepy. That's when I heard it, a light knocking sound. At first, I thought it was coming from my window, but when I looked over, there was nothing there. The knocking continued, and I realized it seemed to be coming from inside my closet. My blood ran cold. I had checked that closet not even an hour ago. There was nowhere for someone to hide in there. It wasn't that big, and it was mostly full of clothes and shoes. I muted the TV again and listened. The knocking stopped immediately. I sat frozen on my bed staring at the closet door, which was slightly ajar. After what felt like forever, I slowly got up and approached the closet. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. With one quick motion, I yanked the closet door open. Nothing, just my clothes hanging there and shoes scattered on the floor. I pushed the hangers aside, checking to make sure no one was somehow hiding behind my winter coats. Nothing. I was about to close the closet when I heard something that made my skin crawl. Ryan. Someone had just called my name. It sounded exactly like my dad's voice coming from the hallway. My first thought was relief. My parents were home early, but then I remembered they wouldn't be back until midnight, and it was only around 9:45. Ryan. The voice called again, identical to the first time. Not just similar, identical. The exact same tone, pitch, and inflection, like someone had recorded my dad saying my name and was playing it back. I stood frozen by my closet, unable to move or speak. The voice called a third time. Ryan. Again, exactly the same as before. That's when I knew something was very wrong. People don't say things exactly the same way twice in a row, let alone 3 times. The voice was too perfect, too consistent. It wasn't my dad. It couldn't be. Dad, I finally managed to call out, my voice barely above a whisper. Ryan. The voice called again, exactly the same as before. It wasn't responding to me. It was just repeating my name in my dad's voice. I had seen enough horror movies to know what was happening. Something was trying to lure me out of my room. Something that could sound like my dad but wasn't him. Something that wanted me to open my door. With shaking hands, I grabbed my desk chair and wedged it under my doorknob. Then I pushed my dresser in front of the door for good measure. I backed away until I hit my bed and collapsed onto it, never taking my eyes off the door. Ryan. The voice called again from the hallway. Then I heard footsteps, light, almost delicate footsteps, pacing back and forth outside my door. I grabbed my phone and called my parents. Mom picked up on the 3rd ring. Ryan, everything okay? She had to speak loudly over the background noise of the restaurant. Mom, I whispered, terrified that whatever was outside my door would hear me. Is Dad with you right now? Of course he is. We're still at the dinner. What's wrong? Someone's in the house, I said, my voice cracking. Someone who sounds exactly like Dad is calling my name from the hallway. There was a pause, and I could hear Mom's voice get serious as she told Dad what I'd said. Then she came back on the line. We're calling the police right now. Stay in your room with the door locked. We're leaving the restaurant now and we'll be home in 20 minutes. As soon as I hung up, the voice called again. Ryan. Still exactly the same. Then the doorknob started to turn slowly. I watched in horror as it rotated back and forth, testing the lock. The chair wedged under it shuddered slightly, then came knocking on the door itself. Not frantic pounding, but slow, deliberate knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Ryan. Knock, knock, knock. I was paralyzed with fear, sitting on my bed with my knees pulled up to my chest. I wanted to scream, but was afraid of provoking whatever was out there. The knocking and the voice continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then I heard sirens in the distance, growing louder. The knocking stopped immediately. The footsteps receded down the hallway, moving faster now. I heard what sounded like the guest bedroom door opening and closing. When the police arrived, I was still in my room. I heard them enter the house and call out. Only when I heard one of the officers identify himself did I move the dresser and chair and unlock my door. 2 officers searched the entire house while a 3rd stayed with me. They checked every room, closet, underbeds, the attic, The basement. They found nothing, no signs of forced entry, all doors and windows still locked from the inside. "Son, are you sure you heard someone?" the older officer asked me. "Sometimes these old houses make strange noises." "I know what I heard," I insisted. "It wasn't the house. Someone was calling my name in my dad's voice, exactly the same way, over and over." The officers exchanged looks I couldn't quite read. By the time my parents got home, the police were preparing to leave. They told my parents they found no evidence of an intruder, but would file a report and have patrols check our house throughout the night. That night, I slept in my parents' room on a mattress on the floor. I couldn't bear to go back to my room. The next day, Dad installed a security system with cameras covering every entrance. Mom sage smudged the house, something she'd never done before. A few days later, I was telling my experience to my history teacher, Mr. Collins, who was into folklore and supernatural stuff. His face got really serious when I mentioned the identical repetition of my name. "What you're describing sounds like what some cultures call a mimic," he said quietly. "Entities that can perfectly imitate the voices of people you know to lure you to them." "What would have happened if I'd opened the door?" I asked. He just shook his head. "In most stories, the people who follow the voice are never seen again. It's been 3 years, and we still live in the same house. Nothing like that has ever happened again. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just my imagination, stress from school, or the horror movie I'd been watching. But deep down, I know what I heard that night. I still sleep with my bedroom door locked, and if someone calls my name from another room, I always make them come to me instead of going to them, because now I know some things can sound exactly like the people you love, but they're not them, and they're waiting for you to make the mistake of opening the door. Story 8. I never told anyone outside my family about what happened to me when I was little. Even now, typing this out, my hands feel shaky. I guess I'm sharing this because I need to make sense of it. Maybe someone else has gone through something similar and can tell me I'm not crazy. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, one of those places where everyone knows everyone. I was 6 years old when we moved into the house on Maple Street. Our family situation was complicated. My parents were going through some rough patches, fighting all the time. My mom's friend Tracy moved in with us with her 3 boys after her husband left. So it was me, my 2 brothers, Tracy's 3 sons, my mom and Tracy, all crammed into this old 2-story house. Being the only girl among all those boys had its perks. I got my own bedroom while all 5 boys had to share a room together. At first, I was so excited to have my own space. That feeling didn't last long. It started about 3 weeks after we moved in. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of a little boy crying. Not just crying, screaming like he was terrified or in pain. I sat up in bed, thinking maybe one of my brothers or Tracy's boys had a nightmare. The screaming stopped suddenly, and then I heard a woman's voice, calm but clear. "Sean's done." I remember pulling my blanket up to my chin, frozen. Who was Sean? None of the boys in our house was named Sean. I wanted to run to my mom's room, but I was too scared to move. I just sat there until I fell back asleep. The next night, it happened again. The same screaming, the same voice saying, "Sean's done." This time I did run to my mom's room and crawled into her bed. She was half asleep and just murmured that I was having a bad dream, but it wasn't a dream. I heard it. This continued every single night for weeks, always at the same time, around 3 in the morning, always the same pattern, screaming, crying, then, "Sean's done." Nobody else seemed to hear it, or if they did, they never mentioned it. I started sleeping in my mom's room more and more often. She got annoyed at first, but eventually just accepted it. One night, I had to use the bathroom. Mom walked me there and waited outside. I was still scared of going alone in the dark. As we were walking back to her room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the empty spare room at the end of the hall, we used it for storage, I saw a small black silhouette of a boy, just standing there, no features, just a black outline against the darkness, and I knew it was looking right at us. I didn't say anything to Mom. I just hurried back to bed and pulled the covers over my head. I didn't want her to think I was even crazier than she already thought I was. After that night, things escalated. I started hearing a woman walking in the hallway outside my room every night. She would walk back and forth, whispering something I couldn't quite make out. I would lie perfectly still, hardly breathing, hoping she wouldn't come into my room. One night, I'll never forget this as long as I live, I was hiding under my blankets like I always did, when the whispering suddenly got louder, closer. Then I felt the blanket move slightly, like someone was leaning over me, and a woman's voice whispered directly into my ear, "You're mine." I've never been so terrified in my life. I couldn't scream, I couldn't move. I just lay there, tears streaming down my face, until morning came. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Who would believe me? I was just the little girl who had night terrors. The next morning I was sitting on my bed, still shaken from the night before, when I saw something move at the end of the hallway. That same black silhouette of a boy, only this time it was emerging from the wall, just stepping out like the wall was a doorway. Then it walked slowly past my room. I remember how my whole body went ice cold and I couldn't look away. Around this time, my mom started noticing I was sleepwalking. Apparently, this had been going on since I was about 5, but it got worse in that house. One night, she found me sitting cross-legged in front of the TV at 3 in the morning. The TV wasn't on, but when she asked me what I was doing, I told her I was watching my show and that afterward, I wanted to hang out with my friends outside. She said I was staring at the black screen like something was actually playing on it. My mom was freaked out, but she tried to rationalize it. Kids sleepwalk. Kids have active imaginations. Kids have nightmares. But it wasn't just me anymore. Tracy's boyfriend Paul started staying over sometimes, and once when Mom and Tracy were out, he was watching us kids. After they got back, I overheard him telling them he'd heard and seen sketchy shit when he was alone downstairs. He described hearing the same footsteps I'd been hearing and seeing shadows move across walls when there was nothing there to cast them. My older brother, Jake, had his own experience. He woke up one night and saw Mom standing rigidly next to her bed, staring straight ahead. He called out to her, but she didn't respond. After a few minutes, she just got back into bed like nothing happened. When he asked her about it the next morning, she had no memory of it. Everyone started hearing the footsteps on the stairs at night, the knocking on walls, the whispering, but nobody talked about it openly. It was like we were all afraid that acknowledging it would make it worse somehow. For me, though, it was getting worse. The silhouette boy, in my head, I started calling him Sean, though I don't know why, appeared more frequently, sometimes in my room, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes just a glimpse at the corner of my eye, and always that feeling of being watched. The woman's voice got more insistent too. "You're mine" became a regular whisper in my ear, sometimes accompanied by a cold touch on my arm or hair. I developed a system of sleeping with my back against the wall, covers pulled up so only my eyes peeked out, a stuffed animal clutched in my arms as if it could protect me. My parents' fighting got worse during this time. Dad was hardly ever home, and when he was, all they did was scream at each other. Looking back now, I wonder if the house was affecting them too, amplifying all the negative emotions. When I was 7, they finally decided to divorce. Mom said we were moving out, that we'd find a new place with just me, her, and my brothers. Tracy and her boys were going to her mother's house in another state. The day before we were supposed to leave, I was alone in my room, packing my things. It was daytime, sunny outside, so I wasn't as scared as usual. But suddenly, the room got cold. So cold I could see my breath, and then I felt it. This overwhelming sense of dread, like something terrible was about to happen, a pressure in my head, a voice that wasn't really a voice telling me to run. I dropped everything and bolted, ran straight out of my room, down the stairs, out the front door, and into the yard. Mom was loading stuff into the car and looked at me like I was crazy. I was barefoot, breathing hard, and probably looked terrified. "What's wrong?" she asked. I couldn't explain it. I just pointed back at the house and said, "It doesn't want me to leave." Mom looked at the house, then back at me. For the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes. Like maybe she finally believed me. She put me in the car, went back inside to grab the last of our things, and we left that afternoon instead of waiting until the next day as planned. We never went back, not even once. Left furniture, left clothes, left toys. Mom said we'd buy new stuff. It wasn't worth going back. I'm 30 now with kids of my own. I've researched that house over the years, tried to find out if anyone named Sean ever lived or died there. I've never found anything concrete, but sometimes I still wake up at 3 in the morning, heart pounding, thinking I've heard a child screaming followed by, "Sean's done." I don't know what was in that house. I don't think it was a ghost. At least not in the traditional sense. It was something darker, something that wanted me specifically. Why me and not the boys? Why was I the one who heard Sean crying every night? Why was I the one the woman whispered to? I don't have answers. All I know is that whatever was in that house on Maple Street followed me into adulthood in the form of nightmares and a lingering fear of the dark. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I'm home alone and catch a movement from the corner of my eye, I'm 6 years old again, watching a small black silhouette step out of my wall. Story 9. I still get goosebumps thinking about that night. This happened about 2 years ago when I was 21 and living with my mom in Toronto. I've tried to rationalize it countless times, but I just can't explain what my best friend and I experienced. My mom had gone to Europe for 2 weeks to visit my aunt, so naturally, I invited my best friend Kyle over. We'd been friends since elementary school, and having the house to myself was the perfect opportunity to hang out without my mom nagging us about being too loud. Kyle and I usually spent our nights drinking beers and playing Call of Duty until early morning, but that night was different. We both had work the next day. I had an early shift at the warehouse, and Kyle had to open the coffee shop where he worked. So instead of our usual routine, we decided to crash early around 11:30. Our plan was simple: get a good night's sleep and head to work the next morning. I had a small 2-bedroom house in the suburbs, nothing fancy but comfortable enough. My room had this walk-in closet that I rarely used, just stuffed old clothes and shoes in there. My dog Max, a German Shepherd mix, always slept at the foot of my bed. Kyle took the air mattress on the floor beside me. Nothing unusual about the setup. We chatted for a bit about random stuff, work drama, this girl Kyle was trying to talk to, the usual. Max was already snoring at the foot of the bed. Everything felt normal, just a regular night. I remember checking my phone one last time, seeing it was just past midnight, then drifting off to sleep. What happened next still makes my skin crawl. I was jolted awake by this sound. It's hard to describe exactly, but it was like someone crying, not just any crying, but this weird, unsettling mix of sobbing and laughing. It was definitely a girl's voice, high-pitched and young-sounding, coming from the direction of my closet. I sat up immediately, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The room was dark except for the faint blue light from my alarm clock that read 3:17 a.m. Kyle was already sitting up too, so I knew I wasn't imagining it. Max was alert at the foot of the bed, his ears perked up, staring intensely at the closet door. The hair on his back was standing up, and he was making this low growling sound I'd never heard from him before. "What the fuck, bro?" Kyle whispered, his voice trembling. The moment he spoke, the sound stopped, just completely ceased. The sudden silence felt almost as terrifying as the noise itself. We sat there frozen for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Yeah, man, what the hell was that?" Kyle's eyes were wide, and I could see he was as freaked out as I was. I reached over and turned on my bedside lamp. The sudden light made the room feel a bit safer, but Max was still staring at the closet, growling. I've had Max since he was a puppy, and he's never been the type to get spooked easily. Seeing him like that made everything 10 times worse. My legs felt like jelly as I got out of bed. Kyle grabbed my arm. "Dude, what are you doing?" he hissed. "I need to check," I replied, though every instinct was screaming at me to just grab Max and run out of the house. I slowly approached the closet, Max following behind me, still growling. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob. I took a deep breath and yanked it open, half expecting to see someone or something inside. Nothing, just my clothes hanging and some boxes on the floor. I pushed the clothes aside, checked behind the door, even looked up at the ceiling of the closet. Nothing out of the ordinary. "Maybe it came from outside," Kyle suggested, but we both knew that wasn't right. The sound had been clear as day, coming from inside my room, specifically that closet. "Let's check the rest of the house," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We grabbed our phones for flashlights and did a thorough sweep of the entire house. We checked every room, every closet, under beds, behind curtains, anywhere someone could hide. We even checked the basement, which was unfinished and creepy on a normal day. Nothing was out of place, no signs of a break-in, all windows and doors locked from the inside. When we got back to my room, Max had calmed down a bit but was still keeping his distance from the closet. Kyle and I sat on my bed trying to make sense of what had happened. "Dude, that was definitely a girl's voice," Kyle said, his voice still shaky. "Like a young girl, maybe a teenager." I nodded, but it wasn't just crying. It was like laughing at the same time. I've never heard anything like it. "And the way it just stopped when I spoke," Kyle added, running his hands through his hair. Like whatever it was knew we were listening. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us trying to process what we'd experienced. The digital clock now read 3:42 a.m. The thought of trying to go back to sleep in that room made my stomach turn. "I can't stay here tonight," I finally said. "Thank God," Kyle replied, already reaching for his jeans. I was about to say the same thing. We got dressed in record time, grabbed Max's leash, and were out the door within minutes. I remember how cold it was outside, the kind of bone-chilling cold you get in Toronto during winter nights, but I barely noticed it. We got in my car and just sat there for a minute, the engine running for heat. "Where to?" Kyle asked. "Walmart," I suggested. It was the only place I could think of that would be open all night where we could just hang out without looking suspicious. So that's what we did. We drove to the 24-hour Walmart about 15 minutes away and spent the next 3 hours wandering the aisles, buying snacks we didn't need, and taking turns walking Max around the parking lot. We didn't talk much about what had happened. I think we were both too freaked out. But every now and then, one of us would say something like, "You definitely heard it too, right?" Just to confirm we weren't going crazy. By 6:30, we decided to head to a nearby Tim Hortons for breakfast before going to our respective jobs. I was exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. Kyle looked like he'd seen a ghost, which for all we knew, maybe we had. Work that day was a blur. I kept zoning out, replaying that sound in my head. The mixture of crying and laughing, the way it seemed to emanate from my closet, Max's reaction. It all felt so real and yet so impossible to explain. I finished my shift at 3 and texted Kyle. We agreed to meet up at his place instead of going back to my house. Neither of us was eager to return there, especially not as night approached again. When I got to Kyle's apartment, we finally talked about it properly. We went through every possible explanation. Maybe it was the neighbors. Nope, the closest house was too far for sounds to carry that clearly. Maybe someone was playing a prank, but who and how did they get in and out without a trace? Maybe it was just the house settling or pipes or something, but houses don't make sounds like a girl crying and laughing. "I'm not staying there alone tonight," I told Kyle. "Not until my mom gets back." Kyle offered to let me crash at his place, which I gratefully accepted. I went back to my house during daylight hours to pack some clothes and grab Max's food. I swear I sprinted through that house, trying not to look at my closet as I stuffed clothes into a duffel bag. The weirdest part of this whole story came about a week later. Another friend of ours, Jamal, came over to Kyle's place. We hadn't told him about our experience yet. Honestly, we were afraid he'd think we were making it up or had been drunk or high. We weren't. But then Jamal mentioned that he'd stopped by my house the night before that incident, around 1 in the morning. He knew my mom was away and thought I might be up for a late-night hang. He said he pulled into my driveway but didn't text or call because he noticed my bedroom light was off. The weirdest thing happened though, Jamal said, completely unprompted. I was about to leave when I heard someone call my name. It sounded like a girl, which was weird because I thought you were alone. I got out of my car and looked around, but didn't see anyone. It freaked me out, so I just left. Kyle and I just stared at each other. Jamal has always been the skeptical type, the one who makes fun of ghost stories and supernatural stuff. For him to mention this without knowing what we'd experienced, it was too much of a coincidence. We finally told him what happened, and for once Jamal didn't laugh or try to debunk it. He just looked pale and said, "I'm never going to your house again, man." I ended up staying at Kyle's until my mom returned from Europe. When she got back, I casually asked if anything strange had ever happened in the house, especially in my room. She just gave me a weird look and said no. I never heard that sound again, even after moving back home. But sometimes Max would still stare at my closet and whine, refusing to come near it. 6 months later, my mom decided to move to a smaller place since I was planning to get my own apartment soon anyway. I can't say I was upset about leaving that house behind. To this day, I can't explain what Kyle and I heard that night. I've researched local history, trying to find any stories about young girls dying in the area, but came up empty. I've looked into acoustic phenomena, psychological explanations, everything I could think of. Nothing fits. All I know is that the sound of that girl, crying and laughing at the same time, still haunts me. I hear it in my dreams sometimes, and I wake up in a cold sweat checking my closets before I can go back to sleep. I'm just glad I don't live in that house anymore, and that I wasn't alone when it happened. If Kyle hadn't been there to confirm what I heard, I might have convinced myself I was losing my mind. Story 10. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what happened last month. I've been hesitant to share this because it sounds crazy, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone here has experienced something similar. So, about a month ago, my buddy Alex and I were taking our usual evening walk around our small town in northern Austria. It was late September and the days were getting shorter. The sun was already setting around 6 in the evening, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. We'd been walking for about an hour when I realized I'd run out of tobacco. I'm a roll-your-own kind of guy, and Alex was getting antsy for a smoke break, so we detoured to this little corner store run by an old Turkish man. The place smells like a mix of spices and cleaning products, but he's the only one who sells my favorite brand. With fresh tobacco in hand, we continued our walk, taking the shortcut toward my apartment. There's this small park on the way. Locals know it used to be a Jewish cemetery before World War II. Most of the headstones were removed decades ago, but you can still see a few embedded in the ground if you look closely. The town converted it into a public space in the 80s, but it's always had a strange vibe. Not many people hang out there after dark. We sat down on this low stone wall bordering the park to roll cigarettes. It was getting properly dark by then, with that blue-gray twilight making everything look slightly unreal. The streetlights had just come on, and windows in the surrounding buildings were lighting up one by one as people returned home from work. That's when I noticed it, a window on the 3rd floor of the apartment building across from us. The light inside was flickering, not like a candle but like a faulty bulb that couldn't decide whether to work or not. I pointed it out to Alex, making some joke about the building's ancient wiring. "Probably some old-timer too cheap to replace the bulb," he said, not really interested, but something about it caught my attention. I kept watching while finishing my cigarette. The flickering wasn't regular. It would go steady for a few seconds, then sputter rapidly, then dim completely before surging bright again, and the light itself had this yellowish tint that made it stand out from the white LED glow of neighboring apartments. "Look at that," I said, nudging Alex. "Does that look normal to you?" He glanced up briefly. "It's just a bad bulb, Marcus." "Why do you care?" I was about to look away when I saw them, shadows moving across the window. Not ordinary shadows, like someone walking past a light source. These were different, rapid, jerky movements that didn't seem to follow normal human patterns. They stretched and contracted like they weren't being cast by solid objects. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper, even though no one could hear us from across the street. "See what?" "The shadows in that window. Watch for a second." Alex squinted at the window, and I saw his expression change. "What the fuck is that?" The shadows were moving faster now, darting back and forth. Some seemed tall and thin, elongating toward the ceiling before shrinking down again. Others moved horizontally, sliding across the window in a way that didn't match how a person would walk. And there were moments when several shadows converged, creating this dense black mass that seemed to pulse. "Someone's probably just waving their arms around," Alex suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. What made it truly unsettling was that we couldn't see what was casting these shadows. The light was positioned in a way that should have shown silhouettes of people or objects, but the shapes didn't match anything I could identify. They moved too quickly, too fluidly in some moments, and too jagged in others. "I'm going to record this," I said, pulling out my phone. Whatever was happening, I wanted proof. But when I opened my camera app and pointed it at the window, my screen went completely black, not just dark, pitch black, like the camera had shut off. I checked to make sure I hadn't accidentally pressed something, but the app was running. The battery was at 80%. I could see the recording button and other controls on screen, but where the window should have been, there was nothing but darkness. "That's weird," I muttered, moving my phone slightly. As soon as I aimed the camera away from the window, the screen returned to normal, showing the darkening park and street. But the moment I pointed it back at the flickering window, total blackness. "Let me try," Alex said, taking out his own phone. Same result. His screen went completely dark when aimed at the window, but functioned perfectly when pointed anywhere else. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the evening air. I've heard stories about certain phenomena not appearing in photographs or recordings, but I'd always dismissed them as urban legends or technical glitches. This was different. Both our phones were new models, and they were failing in exactly the same way, at exactly the same spot. "Maybe it's some kind of interference," Alex suggested, but he sounded uncertain, like an electromagnetic field or something. I nodded, though I didn't believe it. What kind of electromagnetic field would affect only the part of our screens showing that specific window? We kept trying for several minutes, switching between photo and video modes, adjusting settings, even walking a few meters in different directions to change our angle. Nothing worked. The window remained unphotographable, and all the while, those strange shadows continued their frantic dance behind the flickering light. Then something even stranger happened. As we were still fumbling with our phones, the flickering suddenly stopped. The light stabilized, becoming bright and clear as if someone had just replaced the bulb with a brand new one. The shadows disappeared completely. "See, just a faulty light," Alex said, sounding relieved, but I wasn't convinced. The change had been too abrupt, too deliberate, like whatever had been causing the phenomenon had become aware of our attempts to document it and had decided to stop. We stayed there watching for another 20 minutes or so. The light remained steady, illuminating what appeared to be a normal living room with a bookshelf and what looked like a small dining table. No movement, no shadows, nothing unusual, just an ordinary apartment. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing when the light began to dim, not flickering this time, just gradually losing intensity until it was barely visible, like someone slowly turning a dimmer switch all the way down. "Let's go," Alex said suddenly. "I'm freezing my ass off out here." I wanted to stay longer to see if anything else would happen, but he was already standing and stamping his feet to get the blood flowing. Reluctantly, I got up too. As we turned to leave, I glanced back at the window one last time. The light was almost completely out now, just the faintest glow remaining. And just for a second, so briefly I might have imagined it, I thought I saw a single tall shadow move across the window. Not jerky or unnatural like before, but slow and deliberate, as if someone was deliberately showing themselves. Then the light went out completely. I tried to tell myself there was a rational explanation. Old buildings like that have electrical problems. The shadows could have been created by objects in the room that we couldn't see from our angle. The phone's malfunctioning could have been some weird technical glitch, but deep down, I knew better. Whatever I'd witnessed that evening wasn't normal. The next day, I walked by the same building in broad daylight. It looked completely ordinary. A typical pre-war apartment block with peeling paint and small balconies. I counted up to the third floor and identified what I thought was the same window. It had plain white curtains, partially open, revealing glimpses of a normal room. I asked around about the building, trying to sound casual. Apparently it's mostly occupied by elderly residents who've lived there for decades. The third-floor apartment that caught my attention supposedly belongs to an old woman who rarely leaves home. A neighbor mentioned she's a bit odd, but wouldn't elaborate. I've walked by that building several times since, at different hours, hoping to see the flickering light again. So far, nothing unusual has happened. The window looks completely normal. The light comes on at a reasonable hour each evening and stays steadily on until around 11. But I can't shake the feeling that whatever I saw that night is still there, waiting. Maybe it knows I'm watching now, maybe it's hiding. The thing that bothers me most is the technology part. What kind of phenomenon can selectively block digital cameras? It's like it knew we were trying to capture evidence of its existence and prevented us from doing so. That level of awareness, of intention, is what truly terrifies me. Alex refuses to talk about it now. When I bring it up, he gets irritated and changes the subject. I think he's genuinely trying to forget what we saw. But I can't. The image of those frantic, impossible shadows is burned into my memory. I'm not saying it was supernatural. I'm not even claiming it was dangerous. But it was something beyond my understanding, something that defied explanation. And in a world where almost everything can be explained, categorized, and understood, encountering something truly inexplicable is profoundly unsettling. Has anyone else experienced something similar? Am I crazy for still thinking about this a month later? I just want to make sense of what I saw that night, because until I do, I don't think I'll be able to walk past that building without feeling watched. Story 11. I've been hesitating to post this for almost 2 weeks now. I keep telling myself it was just a hallucination or some weird half-dream state, but it felt too real, too visceral. I need to get this off my chest because I'm still freaking out about it. For context, I'm a 31-year-old software developer living in Boston. Pretty normal life. I've always been the skeptical type, the guy who rolls his eyes when friends talk about ghost sightings or conspiracy theories. I believe in what I can see and touch, in what makes logical sense. 2 Tuesdays ago, I was having a regular weeknight, got home from work around 6, ordered Thai food, and spent a few hours coding on a side project. By 10 o'clock I was pretty wiped out but not quite ready to sleep, so I did what I always do, opened YouTube on my laptop and started watching zero punctuation reviews. I've been a fan of Yatzi's game reviews for years. His cynical humor always helps me unwind. I was sitting up in bed, laptop propped on my thighs, headphones in. The blue light from my screen was the only light in my bedroom besides the orange glow of streetlights filtering through my blinds. I remember specifically watching his review of Mass Effect, then letting autoplay take over. YouTube started playing a compilation of his reviews from 2008. I must have dozed off around 11. I remember feeling my head start to nod, the familiar sensation of drifting off with content still playing. I didn't bother turning it off. I've fallen asleep to YouTube plenty of times before. The next thing I know, I'm being jolted awake by this horrible sound. It was 12:45 according to my bedside clock. The sound was like, God, it's hard to describe, like a high-pitched ringing that kept cutting in and out, mixed with TV static. Not the white noise kind of static, but that harsh, grating electronic interference sound that old TVs would make. It was coming through my headphones, which I was still wearing. When I opened my eyes, what I saw on my screen made my blood run cold. The video playing wasn't zero punctuation. It wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. The screen showed these figures, black, distorted humanoid shapes moving against a bright white background. The contrast was so harsh it hurt my eyes, especially in my dark bedroom. The figures weren't just dark, they were like voids, completely devoid of detail or texture, just pure black silhouettes. But what really freaked me out was this face. There was a distorted face circling around what looked like a square box in the center of the screen. The face kept glitching, jumping from one position to another. It wasn't a normal human face. It was stretched and compressed in impossible ways, like someone had taken a photo and digitally warped it beyond recognition. Sometimes it would freeze for a split second, revealing what might have been eyes or a mouth before jumping again. The whole video had this unnatural quality to it. The movements weren't smooth, they were jerky and erratic, like stop-motion animation done by someone with a serious neurological disorder. The audio kept cutting in and out, sometimes that ringing noise, sometimes silence, sometimes sounds like a record skipping or scratching. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It wasn't like any YouTube video I'd ever encountered. It didn't look like an art project or a creepypasta attempt or anything with a clear purpose. It felt wrong, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to see. The weirdest part was that I couldn't look away at first. For maybe 5 or 6 seconds I just stared, trying to process what I was seeing. Then the face glitched particularly violently, stretching across the entire screen for a moment, and I felt this visceral wave of dread wash over me. I instinctively threw my arm up to shield my eyes and hit some keys on my keyboard. The video immediately stopped, and when I lowered my arm, YouTube was playing another zero punctuation video like nothing had happened. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I yanked my headphones off and sat there in the dark, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My first thought was that it must have been some kind of weird ad, or maybe I'd accidentally clicked on something. But that didn't make sense. The video had no interface, no skip button, no title, no views or likes count, none of the usual YouTube elements. I took a few deep breaths to calm myself down. My hands were shaking as I navigated to my browser history to see what the hell I'd just watched. This is where it gets really strange. According to my history, I'd watched a zero punctuation review of Fallout 3, and then immediately after, a review of Dead Space. The timestamps showed the Fallout 3 video ending at 12:44 and the Dead Space 1 starting at 12:45. There was only a 1-minute gap between the videos, barely enough time for what I'd experienced, which felt like it had gone on for at least a few minutes. More importantly, there was no record of any weird video in between. Nothing, like it had never happened. I searched through my YouTube history specifically, thinking maybe the browser history was incomplete for some reason. Same result, just the 2 legitimate videos with nothing between them. At this point, I was seriously questioning my sanity. Had I dreamed it? But I remembered being fully awake, and the sensations were too vivid. The sharp contrast hurting my eyes, the horrible sound in my ears, the feeling of dread. It didn't feel like a dream. I spent about an hour Googling variations of weird, glitchy YouTube video with black figures and distorted face YouTube glitch, but nothing similar came up. Just the usual creepy art projects and short films that were clearly intended to be unsettling, but nothing like what I'd seen. Eventually, I convinced myself I must have experienced some kind of hypnagogic hallucination. Those weird visions some people get when transitioning between wakefulness and sleep. It was the only explanation that made any sense. I was tired, I'd fallen asleep watching videos, and my brain had created a disturbing waking dream. I tried to go back to sleep, but I kept my bedside lamp on and put on some light comedy instead. I didn't want to risk seeing that thing again. The next day, I felt better. In the light of day, the whole experience seemed less terrifying and more like an odd neurological hiccup. I even told a coworker about it over lunch, laughing it off as the weirdest dream I've ever had. But then things started happening that made me question my rational explanation. 3 nights after the incident, I was using my laptop again when the screen flickered for a split second. Just a brief flash, but I swear I caught a glimpse of that same harsh white background. I immediately slammed the laptop shut and didn't use it again that night. A few days later, I was scrolling through YouTube on my phone when I came across a video with a thumbnail that made my stomach drop. It wasn't the same as what I'd seen that night, but it had a similar aesthetic. High contrast, black and white with distorted figures. My finger hovered over it for a moment before I scrolled past as quickly as I could. I didn't want to see if it was related. Last night I woke up at exactly 12:45 again. No video this time, no strange sounds. I'd stopped falling asleep with YouTube playing, but I woke up with that same feeling of dread, like something was watching me. I turned on every light in my apartment and checked all the closets and under the bed like a scared kid. Nothing, of course. I'm not sleeping well anymore. I keep thinking about what I saw. The more I try to rationalize it, the more details I remember that don't fit with the hallucination theory. Like how the video seemed to respond when I moved my hand. The face glitched more violently right before I covered my eyes, almost like it was reacting to me. And why would my browser history be missing exactly 1 minute? If I'd fallen asleep watching videos on autoplay, there should have been a much bigger gap. I've always been skeptical of paranormal stuff, but this experience has shaken that certainty. I don't know what I saw or experienced that night. I don't know if it was some kind of weird technical glitch, a hallucination, or something else entirely. What bothers me most is the feeling I had while watching it. Like I wasn't supposed to be seeing it, like I'd accidentally tuned into something private or forbidden. It felt intrusive, but I was the one being intruded upon. I've stopped using autoplay completely. I don't let videos run when I'm not actively watching them. I've even put a piece of electrical tape over my laptop camera, which I always thought was paranoid before. Sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I see that face again, that horribly distorted face circling endlessly. I hear that ringing cutting in and out. I'm writing this partly to see if anyone else has experienced anything similar. Has anyone else encountered a video like this on YouTube? Something that seemed to appear out of nowhere and then disappear without a trace? Something that felt wrong in a way that's hard to articulate? I know how this sounds. If someone had told me this story 2 weeks ago, I'd have thought they were making it up or that they'd fallen asleep and had a nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And the worst part is, I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't random, that somehow that video found me specifically, that it was meant for me to see. I still check my browser history every morning, scanning for gaps or unknown videos. So far, nothing unusual has appeared, but I'm scared to fall asleep with any screens on now, scared of what might play when I'm not fully conscious to control it. I don't know what to do with this experience. I don't know how to process it or move past it. All I know is that something happened that night that I can't explain, and it's changed how I see the world. Maybe there are things out there beyond our understanding, things that can reach us through the technology we've surrounded ourselves with. Or maybe I'm just losing my mind. At this point, I'm not sure which explanation scares me more. Story 12. I still get goosebumps thinking about that house. It's been 15 years since we moved out, but sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, feeling phantom scratches on my arms, and I'm instantly transported back there. We moved into that old farmhouse when I was 9. My parents thought it was a steal. All that land, the original structure from the 1800s, with additions tacked on over the decades. My dad called it a house with character. If only he knew what kind of character it really had. The layout was bizarre. The original homestead had these thick walls and tiny windows, but previous owners had added on rooms with modern windows. The weirdest part was how they'd kept some of the original windows as interior windows between rooms, so you'd be in the living room and could look through a window into what became the dining area. Same with the kitchen and back rooms. At first we thought it was just a quirky old house. The creaks and groans at night, the doors that wouldn't stay closed, the occasional cold spot. Typical old house stuff, right? My sister Ellie and I shared a room on the second floor. My brother Jake had the room across the hall. The scratches started about 3 months after we moved in. I woke up one morning with 3 thin red lines across my forearm. They weren't deep, but they stung like paper cuts. I figured I'd scratched myself in my sleep, but then Ellie showed me similar marks on her shoulder. We blamed Whiskers, our tabby cat, though he'd never scratched us before. Then the scratches started showing up in places that made no sense. Across my back, on Ellie's stomach, under our pajamas. Places a cat couldn't reach without us waking up. One morning, I found scratches on my thigh under my pajama pants, and I knew Whiskers had been outside all night. I'd let him out myself before bed and found him waiting by the door in the morning. When I told Mom, she just frowned and said I must be scratching myself in my sleep. "You always had sensitive skin, Maddie," she said, using calamine lotion on the marks. But I knew I wasn't doing it to myself. The scratches were always in sets of 3, perfectly parallel, too neat to be self-inflicted. The shadows started next. At first, we thought they were caused by headlights from cars turning into our long driveway. The way the light would hit the windows could create weird patterns on the walls. But then we noticed the shadows when no cars were coming. Human-shaped shadows moving across the living room wall, disappearing into corners. They never made sound, just silent dark shapes sliding across our periphery. I started avoiding being alone in rooms. If I had to go to the bathroom at night, I'd wake Ellie up to come with me. We never talked about why, just a silent agreement that being alone in that house felt wrong. My parents thought we were just being dramatic kids. Dad would laugh about our overactive imaginations, and Mom would tell us to stop scaring each other with ghost stories. But we weren't making it up. We weren't telling ghost stories. We were living one. One night, about a year after we moved in, Whiskers started acting strange. He'd always been a calm, affectionate cat, but that night he sat at the foot of our bed, his back arched, fur standing on end, growling at the open doorway. There was nothing there, nothing we could see, anyway, but Whiskers saw something, his eyes tracking something invisible moving across our room. Ellie and I huddled together under the blankets, too terrified to move. After that night, Whiskers became our guardian. He'd growl and hiss at empty corners, empty hallways. He never went into the basement, ever, and he'd sit outside the bathroom door when any of us were inside, like he was standing guard. The incident with Ellie's friend Hannah happened during the summer when I was 11. Hannah came over to hang out, and we were playing cards at the dining room table. I remember it was a hot day, and the windows were open to catch the breeze. We were laughing about something, I don't even remember what, when Hannah suddenly went quiet. Her face drained of color, and she was staring over my shoulder with this look of absolute terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, turning to see what she was looking at. She pointed at the interior window, the old original window that separated the dining area from what had become a side storage room. "There was a face," she whispered. "A face looking at us. Not from outside, from inside the house, looking from the storage room into the dining area where we sat." "It's probably just Jake trying to scare us," Ellie said, though her voice trembled. But Jake was at baseball practice with Dad. It was just us 3 girls and Mom, who was upstairs folding laundry. Hannah stood up so fast, she knocked her chair over. She ran to the kitchen and grabbed a knife from the drawer. "I saw it," she insisted, her hands shaking. "It wasn't a person. It wasn't normal. Its eyes were all wrong." Mom came downstairs because of the noise and found Hannah clutching a kitchen knife, crying. She called Hannah's parents to come get her. As they pulled away, I saw Hannah in the back seat, staring at our house with wide, frightened eyes. She never came over again. After Hannah left, Mom sat us down and asked what had happened. When we told her, she got this look on her face, not disbelief but recognition, like we'd confirmed something she already suspected. That was the first time I realized my parents might be experiencing things too. The nighttime noises got worse after that, footsteps in the hallway when everyone was accounted for, the sound of doors opening and closing. Sometimes I'd wake up feeling like someone was sitting on the edge of my bed, the mattress depressed under a weight that wasn't there when I turned on the light. Jake started sleeping with his baseball bat beside his bed. Ellie and I pushed our beds together so we wouldn't have to sleep alone. Dad installed more lights around the house, saying it was for security, but I noticed he started checking the locks 3 or 4 times before bed. The worst incident happened about 2 months before we moved out. Jake had his friend Tyler over to play video games. Tyler was this tough kid who wasn't afraid of anything, or so we thought. They were in Jake's room while Ellie and I were watching TV downstairs. Suddenly we heard pounding footsteps on the stairs and Tyler burst into the living room, white as a sheet, grabbing his coat. "I'm out, man. I'm sorry, I gotta go," he was saying as Jake followed him, confused. "What happened?" my dad asked, looking up from his newspaper. Tyler couldn't even form sentences properly. "I saw, in the hallway, from the bathroom. It was, oh hell no, I'm out." He was fumbling with his phone, calling his mom to pick him up immediately. Jake looked embarrassed. "We were just playing games, Dad. I don't know what he's freaking out about." After Tyler left, waiting for his mom on the front porch, refusing to come back inside, Jake told us what happened. Tyler had gone to use the bathroom across the hall from Jake's room. When he came out, he saw something walk from the bathroom to the back bedroom. Something tall and thin that walked on 2 legs but wasn't human. Tyler described it as looking like a cat, but the size of a man, walking upright. "He's making it up," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. That night, none of us could sleep. We all ended up in the living room, with every light in the house turned on, waiting for morning. Even Whiskers was on high alert, growling at the hallway that led to the back bedroom. The scratches got worse after that, not just on Ellie and me anymore, but on Jake too. 3 parallel lines appearing while we slept, sometimes deep enough to draw blood. Mom started taking pictures of them, documenting them in a notebook she thought we didn't know about. I found it once, hidden in her dresser. Pages of notes about the scratches, the shadows, the noises, things moving from where she'd left them. The final straw came a week later. I woke up in the middle of the night to find Whiskers growling at the foot of our bed. Ellie was already awake, clutching my arm so tight it hurt. There was something in our room, a shadow darker than the darkness, standing in the corner. As we watched, frozen in fear, it moved closer to our bed. Whiskers' growling turned to a hiss, his body positioned between us and the shadow. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. The shadow leaned over the foot of our bed, and though it had no discernible face, I felt it looking at us. The temperature dropped so suddenly, I could see our breath. Then Whiskers launched himself at the shadow, yowling and spitting. The shadow recoiled, seeming to dissipate, and the bedroom door slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Our parents came running. When they opened the door, they found Ellie and me huddled together, sobbing, and Whiskers still bristling, staring at the now empty corner. We moved out 2 weeks later. Dad said it was because he got a job offer in another town, but I knew the real reason. We all did, though we never talked about it directly. Mom insisted on bringing Whiskers' litter box and food bowls last, so he could stay with us until the final moment we left that place behind. I've tried researching the history of that house since then. All I could find was that it had changed hands many times over the years, never staying with one family for more than a few years. The land it was built on was once part of a larger property that belonged to a farmer in the 1800s who was known for his strange experiments with animals. Sometimes I still dream about that house, the interior windows with faces peering through, the scratches appearing on my skin, the tall, cat-like figure that Tyler saw. In my dreams, I'm back in that bedroom, watching the shadow approach, but Whiskers isn't there to protect me. I always wake up just as the shadow reaches for me, my heart pounding, checking my arms for scratches that aren't there. I don't know what was in that house. I don't know if it was a ghost or something else. All I know is that it was real, and it wanted something from us that I'm glad it never got. And sometimes when my current cat stares intently at an empty corner of my apartment, I find myself watching too, holding my breath, waiting to see if shadows move where they shouldn't. Story 13. For context, I live in a rural area about 20 minutes outside of town. My family's owned this property for generations. It's nothing fancy, just a 2-story farmhouse with a lot of land around it. I've always felt safe here, even being somewhat isolated. That changed 2 weeks ago. My bedroom was being repainted, so I'd been sleeping on the couch in our game room downstairs for a few nights. It's just a spare room with a TV, some gaming consoles, and this old beige couch that's surprisingly comfortable. The room has only one small window that faces the backyard and our barn. I'd been sleeping fine there until that night. I fell asleep around 11 after binge watching some crime show. I remember checking my phone before dozing off. It was 10:57. Everything was normal. My sister was upstairs in her room, and my parents were in the master bedroom at the other end of the house. I woke up suddenly, that awful feeling where you're instantly alert but something feels wrong. The digital clock on the cable box read 3:18 a.m. I tried to roll over, but I couldn't move, not even my fingers. My breathing became shallow, and I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I'd had it once before in college during finals week, so I tried not to panic, telling myself it would pass, but this felt different. The air in the room changed. It became heavy, almost thick. The temperature dropped so quickly I could see my breath forming clouds in front of my face. That's when I knew something was in the room with me. I couldn't open my eyes fully. They were stuck at half-mast, giving me this blurry, limited view of the room. I could make out the TV stand, the dark window, and then movement. Something shifting in the corner where we keep the board games stacked on a shelf. I tried to scream, but my vocal cords were frozen like the rest of me. The shadow, that's the only way I can describe it, moved toward the couch. It didn't walk exactly. It kind of glided, like smoke being pulled across the room. When it reached me, I felt the couch cushions sink down near my head. I still couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even close my eyes to shut it out. Then I felt it, a hand on my throat, cold, so unbelievably cold it burned my skin. The pressure increased slowly, deliberately, like it was savoring the moment. With its other hand, it covered my nose and mouth completely. I couldn't breathe at all. My lungs started burning, screaming for air. I was fighting inside my own body, trying desperately to move just one finger, one muscle, anything to break free. The edges of my vision started darkening, and I thought, this is it. I'm gonna die on this stupid couch in the game room. That's when I heard her voice. Emily, you need to move now. Fight it, sweetheart. Move your hand. It was my grandmother's voice, clear as day. My grandmother who had died just 11 days earlier after a short battle with pneumonia. We'd just had her funeral the previous weekend. Something about her voice gave me strength. I focused everything I had on moving my right arm. For what felt like forever, nothing happened. The pressure on my throat increased. The darkness at the edges of my vision spread inward. Then suddenly, like a rubber band snapping, I felt my arm jerk upward. I swung wildly, my fist connecting with something that felt both solid and not, like punching through cold jello. The pressure on my throat vanished instantly. I gasped, sucking in air so hard it hurt my lungs. My whole body could move again, and I sat up, coughing and clutching my throat. That's when I saw it clearly. Standing at the foot of the couch was a figure about 6 feet tall, dark as a shadow, but somehow more substantial. It had no clear features except for 2 points of dull red light where eyes should be. As I stared at it, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, it laughed. The sound was like gravel being crushed, dry and grating and wrong. Then it backed away toward the wall between the game room and the kitchen. It didn't turn around. It just kept facing me as it moved backward until it reached the wall, and then it passed through it, like it was never there. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, shaking uncontrollably, before I found the courage to get up. I turned on every light in the downstairs area and checked every room, every closet, behind every door. Nothing. I was alone. I even went outside with a flashlight and checked around the house. Nothing was disturbed. When I finally calmed down enough to think clearly, I convinced myself it had been an unusually vivid episode of sleep paralysis combined with a nightmare. The brain can do weird things, right? I didn't want to wake my family over what was probably just my imagination. Eventually, exhaustion won out, and I fell asleep with all the lights on, sitting upright in an armchair instead of the couch. The next day, I was jumpy but tried to act normal. My throat felt sore, but I didn't notice any marks when I checked in the mirror. I didn't tell anyone what happened. What would I even say? Hey, I think some shadow monster tried to strangle me last night, but don't worry, Grandma's ghost saved me. They'd think I was losing it. I decided to sleep in the game room again that night, partly because my bedroom still wasn't ready. But honestly, I also wanted to prove to myself that the previous night had just been my imagination. I set up a small lamp next to the couch and kept it on. I even downloaded a sleep tracking app, thinking maybe it would record if I had another episode. I fell asleep around midnight, after struggling to keep my eyes open while watching videos on my phone. I woke up at 3:12 a.m. The lamp was off, and I couldn't move again. This time, I didn't even have those few seconds of confusion. I knew immediately what was happening. The same cold filled the room, the same heaviness in the air. I tried to prepare myself mentally, tried to focus on moving before it could reach me. But this time it moved faster. One moment the room was empty, and the next, the shadow was looming over me. No gradual approach. It just appeared, bent down, and again placed one hand on my throat and the other over my mouth and nose. The cold was worse this time, so intense it felt like my skin might crack. I couldn't breathe at all from the first moment, and this time it spoke. "You don't belong here," it whispered, its voice like dry leaves scraping across pavement. "This is my home now." I was panicking, using all my mental strength to try to move, but nothing happened. My lungs were screaming for air. That's when I heard my grandmother again. "Emily, listen to me. You're the protector of this house. If it takes you, everyone here is in danger. You have to fight. You have to mean it when you tell it to leave." I didn't understand what she meant about me being the protector, but something about those words made something click inside me. This wasn't just about me surviving. It was about protecting my family. With that thought, rage replaced my fear. I managed to move my arm again, this time faster than the night before, and swung at the shadow. My hand went through it, but the entity recoiled anyway. The pressure on my throat lessened just enough for me to gasp in a small breath. I found my voice, weak and raspy. "Get out," I wheezed. "This is my home, not yours." The shadow figure seemed to vibrate, like it was agitated. It reached for me again, but I was fully mobile now. I sat up and repeated more firmly, "Get out of my house. You are not welcome here." The thing made that awful laughing sound again, but it backed away. As it reached the wall, I heard my sister's voice from the doorway. "Emily, are you okay?" I heard Grandma's voice telling me to check on you. The shadow froze. My sister flipped on the light switch, and in that instant, the entity seemed to shatter, breaking apart into wisps of darkness that dissipated into nothing. I broke down crying as my sister rushed to me. When she reached me, she gasped and pointed at my neck. I ran to the bathroom mirror and saw what had frightened her. Dark bruises in the shape of fingers around my throat, and small scratches where the thing's nails had dug into my skin. We woke our parents, who were understandably confused and frightened by the marks on my neck. They called the police, thinking someone had broken in, but the officers found no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing. My dad checked our security cameras, but they showed no one entering or leaving the house. What freaked me out most was when my sister described what woke her up. She said she heard our grandmother's voice saying, "Check on Emily now. She needs you." My sister hadn't known about my experience the previous night, or that I'd heard Grandma's voice too. It's been weeks, and the entity hasn't returned. The bruises on my neck have faded, but I still have trouble sleeping. I keep thinking about what my grandmother said about me being the protector of the house. My family has owned this property for generations, and there are old family stories about certain family members having a special connection to the land. But I always thought they were just tales. I still don't understand what that shadow thing was, or why it targeted me. Was it something that had always been here, waiting, or did it follow my grandmother's spirit somehow, and why me? What does being the protector even mean? All I know is that sometimes at night I still feel like I'm being watched, but I also feel my grandmother's presence, not scary but comforting, like she's standing guard. I've moved back into my bedroom now, but I keep a light on all night. Has anyone else experienced something like this, or does anyone know what this entity might have been? I need answers because I have a feeling this isn't over. It's just waiting. Story 14. I still get chills thinking about this, even though it happened 15 years ago. I was 12 years old and living in a small town in Norway when I had my first babysitting job. Our neighbors, the Andersons, had moved in about 6 months earlier with their 3-year-old daughter Maya and their 6-month-old son Eric. They seemed like a nice, normal family, and we'd gotten pretty friendly with them since they moved in. One Friday evening in November, Mrs. Anderson knocked on our door and asked if I could babysit the following night. They were going to a birthday party just down the street and wouldn't be out too late. My parents thought it would be good for me to earn some pocket money, and honestly, I was excited about my first babysitting job. Mrs. Anderson assured me it would be easy since both kids were heavy sleepers who rarely woke up once they were put to bed. The night of the babysitting came, and I walked over to their house around 7 in the evening. It was already dark outside, Norwegian winters, you know, and there was a light snowfall. Their house was a semi-detached, just like ours, pretty typical for our neighborhood. 2 stories with bedrooms upstairs, but their layout was a bit different. The kids' rooms were downstairs, while the main living room was upstairs. Mrs. Anderson gave me a quick tour, showing me where everything was. She'd already fed both kids and put Eric to bed. Maya was still up, but she'd be going to bed at 8. The Andersons gave me their phone number, told me they'd be back around 1 in the morning, and then headed out to their party. Maya was super sweet and easy to handle. We played with her dolls for a bit, and then I read her a bedtime story. She fell asleep before I even finished the book. I checked on Eric, who was sleeping soundly in his crib. Everything was going perfectly. I headed upstairs to the living room and turned on the TV. They had a much bigger TV than we had at home, and I was excited to watch a movie on it. I found some snacks in the kitchen and settled in for a quiet night. Everything was normal until around midnight. I was engrossed in the movie when I heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the front door lock downstairs. The door opened with that familiar creaking sound. I heard footsteps in the hallway and what sounded exactly like Mr. and Mrs. Anderson's voices. I could hear them talking quietly, the rustling of jackets being taken off and shoes being removed. I was surprised they were home so early. They'd said they wouldn't be back until around 1. I paused the movie and went downstairs to greet them. The staircase led down to a small hallway with the front door straight ahead and a corridor to the right that led to the kids' rooms. When I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned the corner to face the front door, there was nobody there. The talking suddenly stopped. The hallway was completely empty. The front door was locked and closed, just as it had been all evening. My heart started pounding. I was sure I'd heard them come in. It had been so clear. Their voices, the door, everything. I quickly checked both kids' rooms. They were both still sound asleep, exactly as I'd left them. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I dozed off during the movie and dreamed the whole thing. Or maybe the movie had some scene with people coming home that I'd confused with reality. I went back upstairs, telling myself not to be stupid. But when I got back to the living room, the TV was off. I was absolutely certain I'd left it on when I went downstairs. I picked up the remote with shaking hands and pressed the power button. The TV turned on, but instead of returning to the movie, there was only static, that black and white fuzzy screen with the hissing noise. I tried changing channels, but every channel was static. The cable must have gone out, I thought, trying to stay rational. But then, just as I was about to try turning the TV off and back on again, I heard the talking downstairs resume. It was the same muffled conversation, the same voices that sounded exactly like the Andersons, and then Eric started screaming. I'd been told he almost never cried at night, but this wasn't just crying. It was a terrified, piercing scream that made my blood run cold. I ran downstairs to his room, but when I got to his door, I froze. The door was closed. I was absolutely positive I had left it open earlier when I checked on him. My hand shook as I turned the doorknob. Eric was standing up in his crib, his little face red from screaming. I picked him up immediately, trying to comfort him. His body was rigid with fear, and he clung to me with surprising strength for a baby. I decided to check on Maya too, and thankfully she was still asleep despite her brother's screaming. But I didn't feel safe leaving either of them in their rooms anymore. I picked Maya up too, managing to balance both children in my arms and carried them upstairs to the living room. The TV was still showing static, so I turned it off. I sat on the couch with Eric in my lap and Maya sleeping beside me. Eric had finally stopped crying, but he wouldn't let go of my shirt. He kept staring at the staircase with wide, frightened eyes. That's when the sounds started again. Footsteps moving around downstairs, opening and closing of cupboards in the kitchen, murmured conversations that I couldn't quite make out. It wasn't just coming from the hallway anymore. It was all over the downstairs. I was terrified but tried to stay calm for the kids. I considered calling the Andersons, but I was too scared to go back downstairs to get the piece of paper with their number that I'd left in the kitchen. My own phone was at home because I didn't have one yet. This was before every kid had a mobile. I thought about taking the kids and running to my house, but it was freezing outside with snow, and I didn't know how to bundle up a baby properly for the cold. Plus, I was afraid of what might be waiting for us downstairs, so I sat there, rigid with fear, holding both children and listening to the sounds of invisible people moving around the house. Sometimes the voices would get louder, as if whoever, or whatever, was down there was getting angry. Other times, they'd fade to whispers. Around 1:30 in the morning, I heard a new sound that made my heart skip. The actual front door opening, followed by real footsteps and real voices. The Andersons were home. I was so relieved I nearly cried. "Emma, why are you still up? And why do you have the kids up here?" Mrs. Anderson asked as she came upstairs and saw us. I was shaking as I told them everything. The sounds of them coming home early, the TV turning off, the static, the baby screaming, and all the noises downstairs that had continued for almost 3 hours. I expected them to laugh it off or tell me I'd imagined it all, but they didn't. They exchanged a look that made my stomach drop. "It's happened again, Mr. Anderson said quietly to his wife. Mrs. Anderson sat down next to me and took Eric, who had finally fallen asleep in my arms. "Emma, I'm so sorry we didn't warn you. We didn't think it would happen while you were here." "Warn me about what?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The voices," she said. "We hear them sometimes at night. That's why we have the kids' rooms downstairs and why we sleep upstairs. The activity seems less intense up here." Mr. Anderson explained that they'd been experiencing strange phenomena ever since they moved in. Voices that sounded like their own, footsteps when no one was there, doors closing by themselves. They'd gotten somewhat used to it and didn't feel like whatever it was meant them harm, but they understood how terrifying it must have been for me. "We should have told you," Mrs. Anderson said. We were afraid you wouldn't want to babysit if you knew, and we really needed a night out." I was stunned. They knew their house was haunted, and they left their kids there every night, and me. They paid me extra, and Mr. Anderson walked me home. My parents were already asleep, and I didn't tell them what happened. I was afraid they wouldn't believe me or would think I was just trying to get out of babysitting in the future. The weird thing is, I did babysit for them again. Many times, actually. I can't fully explain why. Maybe I felt a connection to the kids and wanted to protect them. Or maybe I was just fascinated by the whole thing. The phenomena happened again a few times while I was there, but never as intensely as that first night. The Andersons eventually moved away when Eric was about 2 years old. They never found out what caused the strange occurrences in their house. They had the wiring checked, the heating system examined, even had someone look at the pipes to see if it was just normal house noises being amplified somehow. Nothing explained what we experienced. I've often wondered about the new family that moved in after them. Did they experience the same things? Did they hear phantom versions of themselves coming home at night? Did they feel watched by invisible eyes? I'm 27 now and still can't explain what happened that night. I've tried researching similar phenomena, but nothing quite matches what we experienced. All I know is that something was in that house with us. Something that could mimic voices, manipulate electronics, and move around without being seen. Sometimes I still dream about it, sitting in the dark, holding those two children while invisible footsteps circle below us. And in the dreams, unlike reality, whatever was down there always starts coming up the stairs. Story 15. I've been debating whether to share this for months now. I guess I just need to tell someone who might understand or have gone through something similar. My friends and family think I'm just dealing with regular insomnia, but it's so much more than that. I live in Pinebrook, a tiny village surrounded by dense forest about 40 minutes from the nearest proper town. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, which makes it even harder to talk about what's been happening to me. People here are practical. They don't take kindly to supernatural nonsense. For the past 4 years, I've been trapped in this hellish cycle of sleep deprivation. It's not that I don't want to sleep. God, I'd give anything for just one night of peaceful rest. The problem is what happens when I start drifting off. It always begins the same way. As I'm on the edge of falling asleep, I get this sensation in my chest. It's hard to describe to someone who hasn't felt it. It's like a pressure combined with a dull ache. But there's also this weird energy that seems to vibrate through my rib cage. Over time, I've come to understand it as a warning system, my body's way of telling me, stay awake if you know what's good for you. When I first started experiencing this, I ignored it. I was exhausted and figured it was just anxiety or heartburn. That was my first mistake. If I push past this warning and continue trying to sleep, that's when they appear, the shadows. Not normal shadows cast by objects in my room. These are different. They're humanoid, but wrong. Their proportions are stretched out, especially their limbs, which seem impossibly long. They surround my bed, just standing there, watching. I only see them for a split second before I jolt fully awake, heart pounding like it's trying to escape my chest. For a long time, I convinced myself it was just hypnagogic hallucinations. Those weird visions some people get when falling asleep. But regular hallucinations don't leave physical sensations behind, and they certainly don't escalate the way mine have. Last night was the worst episode yet, which is why I'm finally writing this out. Maybe putting it into words will help me make sense of it, or maybe someone out there has answers. I'd been awake for nearly 40 hours straight. Work has been stressful lately, and I'd been relying on energy drinks and coffee to keep me functioning. By the time I got home, I was beyond exhausted. That weird state where you feel simultaneously wired and completely drained. I remember thinking, maybe I'm tired enough that it won't happen tonight. I took a hot shower, hoping it would relax me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my toothbrush. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Bloodshot eyes with dark circles, so pronounced they looked like bruises, skin pale and waxy. I looked like a walking corpse. When I crawled into bed around 11:30, I was out almost immediately. The warning sensation in my chest started, but I was too far gone to fight it. That familiar pressure built up, spreading from my sternum outward, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. In my half-conscious state, I remember thinking, just let me sleep, please, just let me sleep. The shadows appeared almost instantly. Usually they stay at the edges of my room, but last night they were closer to my bed than ever before. 5 or 6 of them, their forms so black they seemed to absorb what little light was in the room. And they weren't just standing still anymore. They were swaying slightly, like seaweed in a gentle current. I tried to wake up fully, but my body wouldn't respond. It was like being trapped under a heavy blanket. I could think clearly, but couldn't move a muscle. Sleep paralysis, I guess, though I've never experienced it quite like this before. Then I felt my mattress dip, as if someone was sitting down next to me. The weight was substantial, not like a cat jumping on the bed, but like a full-grown person. I still couldn't move or scream, though God knows I was trying. All I could do was lie there, my eyes the only part of me I could control, darting frantically around the room. The blanket covering my face began to move, being pulled down slowly, deliberately. It wasn't yanked off. It was carefully, almost tenderly drawn away from my face. For one insane moment, I thought of my mom, who used to wake me this way when I was a kid. She'd pull the blanket down just enough to plant a kiss on my forehead before heading off to work. That familiar memory was probably why I didn't immediately panic when I felt the pressure of what seemed like lips against my cheek, close to my neck. It was cold, but in my confused state, I almost welcomed the contact. After years of these terrifying experiences, something gentle felt like a relief. That relief lasted maybe half a second before the gentle kiss transformed into something else entirely. It became a powerful suction, like someone was trying to draw something out through my skin. The pain was immediate and shocking, a burning, pulling sensation that made my vision go spotty. It felt like my very essence was being extracted through that single point on my cheek. Somehow that pain broke through the paralysis. I forced myself upright, my body feeling impossibly heavy, like moving through mud. My limbs weren't fully awake yet, and I nearly fell out of bed, my coordination shot to hell. But the terror gave me strength I didn't know I had. The shadows retreated the moment I moved, disappearing into the corners of the room faster than my eyes could track. The weight on my bed vanished too. By the time I managed to slam my hand against the light switch, the room was empty, but I wasn't imagining things. In the bathroom mirror, I could see a dark purplish mark on my cheek, about the size of a quarter. It looked like a bruise, but with a distinct circular shape. By morning, it had faded to a faint reddish spot that could easily be mistaken for a shaving nick or irritation. This wasn't the first time I'd experienced physical after effects. About a year ago, I had a similar episode where I felt a large, ice-cold hand with long nails, too long to be human, slowly trace a path from the top of my head down my spine. I woke up with 3 faint scratch marks on my back that lingered for days. Another time, I was lying on my back with my arms crossed over my chest. I don't usually sleep in that position, which makes this even weirder. Just as I was drifting off, I saw, for just a millisecond, a black figure squatting directly on my chest. It was looking right at me, even though it didn't have visible eyes, just indentations where eyes should be. When I woke up gasping for air, my chest hurt for hours afterward, like someone had been sitting on it. I've tried everything to make it stop. Sleeping pills just make it worse. They force me to stay asleep through the encounters, which is infinitely more terrifying than being startled awake. I've installed brighter lights, slept with the TV on, tried sleeping on the couch instead of my bed. Nothing helps. The only thing that seems to work is having another person in the room. Whenever I've had friends stay over or when I visit family and share a room, nothing happens. No warning sensation, no shadows, nothing. But I live alone, and I can't exactly ask someone to sleep in my room every night just because I'm afraid of the dark. People already think I'm odd enough in this small town. It's gotten to the point where I've developed elaborate routines to avoid sleep. I take short naps during the day when the sun is bright and the house is filled with natural light. At night, I find ways to keep myself occupied. Cleaning, working, anything to stay awake until I literally can't anymore and pass out from exhaustion. Even then, I only get maybe 2 or 3 hours before the cycle starts again. The sleep deprivation is destroying me. I've lost weight. My hands shake constantly. I forget words mid-sentence. My boss has noticed my performance slipping. Sometimes I find myself standing in a room with no memory of why I went there. Last week I drove through a stop sign without even seeing it. Thankfully, no one was coming, but it scared me enough that I've started walking more places instead of driving. I've considered moving, but something tells me these things would follow me. Besides, this is my home. My family has lived in Pine Brook for generations. My parents' house is just down the road, and my sister lives in town with her kids. Leaving feels like giving up, like letting these things win. I've never been superstitious or religious. I was always the skeptic, the one who laughed at ghost stories around campfires. Now I find myself researching protection rituals and sleeping with a Bible beside my bed. Not that it helps. I've even visited the local church, something I haven't done since I was a teenager. The priest was kind, but clearly thought I was suffering from a psychological issue rather than a supernatural one. He gave me a blessing and suggested therapy. Maybe he's right. Maybe this is all happening in my head. But if that's the case, why can I feel the weight on my bed? Why do I have marks on my body? How do I explain the cold spots in my room that appear right before the shadows? So here I am, writing this at 4:17 in the morning, fighting to keep my eyes open. The warning sensation in my chest started about 20 minutes ago, a dull throb that's slowly intensifying. I can feel them waiting, just at the edges of my vision. As long as I stay awake, they can't fully manifest, but I'm so tired, so incredibly tired. If anyone has experienced something similar or knows what these things might be, please help me. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. Sometimes I think about just giving in, letting whatever happens happen. At least then I might finally get some rest. Wait, did you hear that? There's something moving in the corner of my room. The pressure in my chest is getting stronger. I think they know I'm talking about them. I should probably stop now. I should. Story 16. I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural until my family moved into that house in Mesa last October. I was 16 at the time, busy with school, football practice, and my part-time job at the grocery store. When we first toured the place, I didn't pay much attention to which bedroom I'd take. I was barely home anyway. My parents let us kids choose our rooms, and being the oldest of 4, I probably should have picked first, but I told my siblings to go ahead since I really didn't care that much. My sister Ava took the room with the bay window, my brother Ethan chose the one with the built-in bookcase, and even my youngest brother Caleb grabbed the small room with the cool ceiling fan that made spaceship noises when it spun. So I ended up with the last room, which weirdly was actually the largest bedroom besides my parents' master. It was in the original part of the house, while most of the other bedrooms were additions my dad said were built in the 2000s, 90s. This meant my room was separated from everyone else's by the living room, kitchen, and dining area. At first, I thought this was perfect. Privacy for a teenage guy, right? The first red flag came when we were moving in. My dog Rex, a golden retriever I'd had since I was 10, wouldn't follow me into my new room. He'd been glued to my side the entire day, helping supervise the move as dogs do. But when I walked through my bedroom doorway carrying a box of clothes, Rex stopped dead at the threshold. His ears went back, his tail dropped, and he started whining. I called him, but he just backed up and sat firmly in the hallway. "Come on, buddy," I said, patting my leg. "This is our new room." Rex wouldn't budge. He'd follow me anywhere in the house, but he wouldn't cross into my room. The most he'd do was put his front paws just inside the doorway, whine, then back out again. I figured maybe the carpet smelled like the previous owner's cat or something. The first few nights were fine. I was exhausted from the move and fell asleep quickly. But about a week in, I started waking up at the exact same time every night. 1:34 a.m. according to my phone. At first I thought it was just my body adjusting to the new place, but it kept happening, night after night. The room would be freezing cold when I woke up. Not just cool, but bone-chillingly cold, like someone had left a window open in winter. But this was Arizona in October. The nights were still in the 70s, and our thermostat was set at 75 degrees. I'd check the vents, the windows, even peek under the bed looking for some explanation, but there was never anything obvious causing it. After about 2 weeks, I started noticing my stuff wasn't where I left it. My phone charger would disappear from my nightstand only to reappear days later in the exact same spot. My football cleats would be lined up neatly by the door when I knew I'd tossed them in my closet. My school notebooks would be stacked in different orders than how I'd left them. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was more stressed about the move than I realized. Maybe I was sleepwalking or just forgetting things. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. It was strongest when I was trying to sleep. I'd lie in bed and feel eyes on me. Not from the door or the window, but from the closet. The closet door had these old-fashioned louvered panels, and I swear sometimes I could see the slightest movement behind them, like someone was adjusting their position to get a better look at me. After the first month, I started leaving my bedroom light on all night. It didn't help. The watching feeling persisted, and sometimes the light would be off when I woke up at 1:34, even though I knew I'd left it on. I started sleeping on the living room couch, telling my parents I was staying up late studying and just crashed there. My mom eventually confronted me about it. "Jackson, you haven't slept in your room for 2 weeks. What's going on?" I didn't want to sound crazy, but I was exhausted. "Something's wrong with that room, Mom. It's always freezing cold at night. My stuff moves around and I don't know. It doesn't feel right." She gave me that look parents give when they think you're being dramatic. "It's an old house, honey. The air conditioning probably circulates differently in there, and you're probably just misplacing things because you're so busy." "Rex won't even go in there," I pointed out. "Dogs are sensitive to new environments," she said, but I could tell she was a little unsettled by that detail. My brother Ethan overheard us talking. Unlike me, Ethan was into weird stuff, horror movies, true crime podcasts, and lately, paranormal investigation shows. At 15, he was only a year younger than me, but completely different. While I was practical and athletic, he was curious and analytical. "I'll switch rooms with you," he offered, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "I don't mind if it's haunted." My mom rolled her eyes. "Nobody said anything about haunted, Ethan." But I jumped at the offer. "Are you serious? You'd take my room?" "Hell yeah," he said. "My room's way smaller anyway. This is a win-win." We moved our stuff that weekend. I felt guilty watching Ethan eagerly set up his desk under the window where I'd felt that constant stare. But mostly, I felt relieved. Rex immediately made himself at home in my new room, curling up on the rug beside my bed like he'd lived there forever. The first few nights in Ethan's old room were the best sleep I'd had since we moved in. No waking up at 1:34, no cold spots, no missing items. I started to think maybe I had been imagining things or stressing myself out. Then, about a week after the switch, I woke up to loud banging coming from Ethan's room, my old room. It was around 2 a.m., and it sounded like someone was pounding on the walls. I got up and went to check on him, but halfway there the noise stopped. I stood outside his door for a minute, debating whether to knock, but eventually decided not to wake him if he'd managed to fall back asleep. The next morning at breakfast, Ethan looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, pale skin, jumping at small noises. "Rough night?" I asked, feeling guilty. He shrugged. "Just studying late." "I heard some banging from your room," I said carefully. "Around 2, he looked at me sharply. I didn't hear anything, but I could tell he was lying. Over the next few weeks, Ethan started to change. He was spending more and more time in that room with the door closed. He'd snap at our younger siblings over nothing, and he was constantly exhausted. But when our parents suggested he get more sleep, he'd insist he was fine. One night, about a month after our room switch, I heard him yell. It was that familiar time. Around 1:30 a.m., I rushed to his room and found him sitting straight up in bed, staring at the closet. The door was wide open. "Eth, you okay?" I asked. He looked at me, eyes wide. "Did you see it?" "See what?" "The shadow. It was standing in the closet, watching me." His voice was shaking. "Then it It rushed at me, like it was floating but moving fast, right at my face, and then it disappeared. I felt sick. "Ethan, let's go sleep in the living room, both of us." But he shook his head. No, it's fine. I just had a nightmare." He lay back down, pulling the covers up. "Go back to bed, Jackson." I wanted to drag him out of there, but he insisted he was fine. The next day I noticed he'd hung some weird symbols on his walls, things I later recognized as protection sigils from a quick Google search. There was a small bowl of salt on his nightstand and some dried herbs hanging over his bed. Instead of being scared away by what he'd seen, Ethan seemed more intrigued. He started ordering books on the paranormal, on communicating with spirits. I found a Ouija board in his backpack when I was looking for a charger. When I confronted him about it, he just smiled. "I'm helping it," he said. "Helping what?" "Whatever's in that room, it's trapped or confused. I'm going to help it move on." I should have told my parents then, but Ethan swore me to secrecy, and honestly, part of me didn't want to admit what we were both experiencing. It sounded crazy, and my parents would never believe it without proof. Things escalated quickly after that. The strange occurrences weren't just confined to that bedroom anymore. The TV would turn on by itself in the middle of the night. Doors throughout the house would slam shut even when there wasn't any breeze. My little brother Caleb started talking about a shadow man who stood in his doorway at night. The final straw came when my mom called me at work one afternoon, her voice shaking. She'd been home alone doing laundry when every single cabinet and drawer in the kitchen had flown open simultaneously. She was packing overnight bags for everyone to stay at my grandma's house when I got home. I rushed to my brother's room first. The door was locked, which it never was. I pounded on it, calling his name. When he finally opened it, I barely recognized him. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His room was transformed. Black candles everywhere, those symbols painted directly onto the walls now, books open to pages with diagrams I didn't want to understand. "What have you done?" I demanded. He smiled, and it wasn't my brother's smile. "I didn't just help it, Jackson. I invited others." The temperature in the hallway plummeted. I could see my breath. Behind Ethan, in the darkened room, I swear I saw shapes moving along the walls, not shadows cast by anything, but shadows that moved on their own. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing his arm. "Mom's packing bags. We're going to Grandma's." He yanked away from me. "I'm staying. They need me here." I was about to argue when the hallway light flickered and died. In the darkness, I felt something brush past me, cold and solid, yet somehow not there at all. The sensation was like fingers dragging across my back, but heavier, more deliberate. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran to find my parents, to get everyone else out. By the time we convinced Ethan to leave with us, he was different, distant, like part of him stayed behind in that house. We never went back. My dad hired movers to pack our stuff while we stayed with my grandma. We found a new place within weeks. Ethan seems okay now, mostly back to his old self, though sometimes I catch him staring into empty corners of rooms like he's looking for something. I don't know what was in that bedroom or what my brother invited into our home. I just know that sometimes, even now in our new house, I still wake up at 1:34 a.m. feeling cold and watched, and I'm terrified that whatever it was followed us here. Story 17. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks now. I'm not even sure if anyone will believe me, but I'm desperate for answers, or just to know I'm not alone in this. I've been dealing with severe sleep issues for the past 4 years, but lately things have escalated to a point where I'm genuinely scared to close my eyes at night. I'm 26, living in a small suburban house in what most people would consider a nice, quiet neighborhood. Nothing extraordinary about my life. I work a normal office job, have a few close friends, and generally try to maintain a healthy lifestyle. I don't do drugs, I barely drink, and I've never had any history of mental illness. I feel like I need to establish this up front because what I'm about to describe sounds completely insane, even to my own ears. It always starts the same way. I get into bed, exhausted from another day of functioning on minimal sleep. I turn off the lights, close my eyes, and just as I'm drifting off, I see them. Black humanoid shadows stretching along my walls, ceiling, and sometimes even hovering directly above me. They're not solid, more like silhouettes made of dense smoke or ink in water. They move in ways that don't make sense, too fluid and unnatural to be human, but definitely human-shaped. The first few times this happened, I'd jolt awake in a cold sweat, turn on the lights, and of course find nothing there. I tried telling myself it was just hypnagogic hallucinations, those weird things your brain does when transitioning to sleep. But over time, I realized there was something more to it. There's this sensation I get in my chest right before they appear. It's hard to describe. It's like a mixture of pain and vibration, almost like my chest is a tuning fork that's been struck. It's not painful enough to be a heart attack, but it's uncomfortable enough that I can't ignore it. I've come to recognize it as a warning system, my body telling me something is about to happen. Last night was particularly bad. I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open during dinner. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours a night for almost a week. My roommate noticed how terrible I looked and suggested I take some melatonin to help me sleep. I was desperate enough to try anything. I took the melatonin around 10 p.m. and was in bed by 10:30. The drowsiness hit me hard and fast, and for once I thought I might actually get some decent sleep, but just as I was about to drift off, I felt it, that familiar vibration in my chest. It started gentle but quickly intensified until I couldn't ignore it. My instinct was to open my eyes, to fight against sleep like I usually do, but the melatonin made it nearly impossible. I was trapped in that halfway state between wakefulness and sleep, and that's when I saw them again, the shadow figures. But this time, they weren't just fleeting shapes in my peripheral vision. They were gathered around my bed, at least 5 distinct forms, tall and unnaturally thin. Their limbs seemed too long, their movements too fluid, like they were swaying underwater. I couldn't make out any facial features, just black voids where faces should be. I tried to move, to sit up, to scream, but my body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This is when I realized I was experiencing sleep paralysis on top of everything else. I'd read about it before, but had never experienced it so intensely. The rational part of my brain kept repeating, "It's not real, it's just sleep paralysis. It will pass." But then one of the figures moved closer to my bed. It leaned down, its featureless face inches from mine. I could feel cold air where its breath should be. The vibration in my chest became almost unbearable, like a warning alarm blaring at full volume. I've had 3 particularly terrifying encounters that went beyond just seeing these shadow figures. The first happened about 2 months ago. I was sleeping facing the wall, blanket pulled up over my head like a child hiding from monsters. I didn't want to see anything if I happened to open my eyes. I was drifting in and out of troubled sleep when I felt it. A large, cold hand with long, thin fingers and what felt like sharp nails. It started at the top of my head and slowly, deliberately, traced down my back, over the blanket. The touch was light but unmistakable. It lasted for maybe 5 seconds before disappearing, but those were the longest 5 seconds of my life. I was paralyzed with fear, not even daring to breathe until I finally gathered the courage to throw the blanket off and turn on every light in my room. The second incident happened just 3 weeks ago. I was lying on my back with my arms crossed over my chest, a position I rarely sleep in, but I was so exhausted I fell asleep without realizing. I woke up suddenly to find a black humanoid figure squatting directly on my chest. It was heavier than it looked, compressing my lungs so I struggled to breathe. The most terrifying part was that despite having no visible eyes in its featureless face, I could feel it staring directly at me. It knew I was awake. It knew I could see it. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds, I managed to gasp in a breath, and it vanished. But last night was the worst. After seeing the shadow figures gather around my bed, I eventually managed to fall into a fitful sleep. I woke up to the sensation of weight on my mattress, like someone sitting down on the edge of my bed. My blanket was slowly, gently pulled down from my face. The gentleness was what made it so disturbing, like someone revealing the face of a sleeping loved one. Then I felt what I can only describe as lips pressing against my cheek, near my neck. It wasn't aggressive or violent. It felt almost tender. That made it even more terrifying. But then the kiss transformed into something else. It became a powerful suction, like something was trying to draw something out of me through my skin. The vibration in my chest reached a fever pitch, and I felt like my very essence was being pulled toward whatever was attached to my face. With every ounce of strength I had, I forced myself to fully wake up, fighting against my body's resistance. When I finally managed to sit up, gasping for air, there was nothing there, just my empty room, bathed in the pale blue light of early morning. The worst part of all this is that I've discovered a pattern. These experiences never happen when someone else is in the room with me. Last month, my sister stayed over for a weekend, and for 2 glorious nights, I slept peacefully. No vibrations, no shadows, no terrifying encounters. It was the best sleep I'd had in years, but I can't ask someone to sleep in my room every night. I've thought about getting a roommate, but my place is too small for 2 bedrooms. I've considered moving back in with my parents temporarily, but I'm too embarrassed to tell them why. How do you tell your family that you can't sleep alone because shadow people visit you? They'd think I was having a mental breakdown, so I continued to exist in this half-life, functioning on minimal sleep, dreading nighttime, and constantly fighting to stay awake as long as possible. My work performance is suffering. My social life is non-existent. I'm irritable, forgetful, and constantly exhausted. The irony isn't lost on me that sleep, which should be restful and healing, has become the thing I fear most. I've tried everything. Sleeping with lights on, white noise machines, religious symbols by my bed. I'm not religious, but I was desperate. I even consulted a sleep specialist who prescribed medication, but it only makes things worse. It forces me to sleep deeper, which seems to make the experiences more intense and harder to wake from. I don't know what these things are. Sleep paralysis demons, actual spirits, manifestations of some undiagnosed mental illness. I don't know why they've chosen me or what they want. All I know is that every night when that vibration starts in my chest, I'm filled with a primal terror that I cannot explain to anyone who hasn't experienced it. I'm writing this at 4 in the morning after another night of minimal sleep. My eyes burn, my head pounds, and I'm jumping at shadows even in broad daylight. I don't know how much longer I can live like this. Sleep has become not a refuge, but a doorway through which something malevolent repeatedly attempts to reach me. If anyone has experienced anything similar or has any advice beyond the usual, see a psychiatrist, I'm already on the waiting list. I'd be grateful. Even just knowing I'm not alone in this nightmare would be some comfort. I have to try to get some rest now before work. My chest is already starting to vibrate slightly. They're coming again. Story 18. I'm still not sure how to explain what happened that night 6 months ago. I've gone over it countless times in my head, talked with my friends who were there, and searched online for similar experiences. Nothing makes sense. I'm from a small town called Mayapur in West Bengal. Back then I was 17 and attending coaching classes for JE preparations in Kolkata, about an hour's drive away. The classes would run late, usually ending at 8 in the evening, and then we'd all pile into Rohit's dad's Maruti Suzuki Ertiga for the drive home. There were 7 of us who carpooled together. Rohit, who drove, me, Vikram, Sanjay, Priya, Dev, and Aditya. We were all from the same town and had been friends since childhood. The arrangement worked well. Rohit's father let him use the car as long as we all chipped in for petrol. That particular Wednesday in January was just like any other day. Classes ended at 8 as usual, and we started our journey home around 8:15. It was already dark and there was a slight chill in the air. The highway connecting Kolkata to our town isn't very busy after 8, especially on weekdays. About halfway through our journey, we were crossing the Bhagirathi Bridge, a 2-lane bridge that stretches across the river. It's not a particularly long bridge, maybe 300 meters, but there's something eerie about it at night. The streetlights are spaced far apart, creating pockets of darkness between them. On both sides, there are chest-high concrete barriers. Beyond the barriers is a straight drop to the river below. We were chatting about the physics test we had that day, with Priya complaining about how she'd mixed up two formulas. Rohit was driving carefully as always. The radio was playing some Bollywood song that Aditya was singing along to, completely off-key. Just a normal ride home. Then it happened. A man suddenly appeared in the middle of the road, right in front of our car. I still remember his silhouette, tall and thin, standing perfectly still, facing us. He seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Rohit slammed on the brakes and the car screeched to a halt. We all lurched forward and I heard Priya scream. There was a distinct thud, like we'd hit something, but it wasn't a heavy impact, more like the car had nudged against something. "What the hell?" Rohit yelled, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Did you all see that? Where did he come from?" We were all in shock, staring through the windshield. The headlights illuminated the empty road ahead. "I saw him jump off," Vikram said from the back seat, his voice shaking. "He jumped over the side of the bridge." "That's impossible," Sanjay argued. "We hit him. I heard it. I'd heard it too, that thud. It wasn't loud enough to be a full collision, but it was definitely something." "Let's check the car," I suggested, though I was terrified of getting out. What if the man was still there? What if he was hurt? Rohit nodded and turned on the hazard lights. We hadn't seen another car for at least 15 minutes, but it was better to be safe. He tried to start the engine again to move to the side of the road, but nothing happened. The car just made a clicking sound. "Great," Rohit muttered. "Just great." We all got out cautiously. The night was quiet except for the sound of the river flowing beneath us. The air felt colder than before, and a light mist was starting to form over the water. Our breath came out in small clouds as we gathered around the front of the car. There was no dent, no scratch, no sign that we had hit anything at all. "I swear I saw someone," Aditya said, looking around nervously. "We all did, right?" We all nodded. "Then where is he?" Priya asked, hugging herself against the cold. Vikram said he jumped, but... She walked to the edge of the bridge and peered over the barrier. "I can't see anything down there." I joined her, carefully looking over the edge. The river was about 30 feet below, its dark water reflecting the moonlight. There was no sign of anyone in the water or on the banks. "Maybe he ran away," Dev suggested, though none of us believed it. There wasn't enough time for someone to disappear so completely. Rohit was checking under the car, using his phone's flashlight. "There's nothing here. No sign of impact at all." "Try starting it again," Sanjay suggested. Rohit got back in and turned the key. Again, just a clicking sound. He popped the hood and we all gathered around to look at the engine, though only Rohit had any idea what he was looking at. "Battery seems fine," he said, fiddling with some connections. "Everything looks normal." We tried calling for help, but there was hardly any signal on the bridge, 1 bar at most, not enough to make a call. And as I mentioned, the highway was deserted at that hour. That's when we heard it, a sound coming from beneath the bridge. At first, I thought it might be an animal or the water hitting against the supports. But as we fell silent and listened, it became clear it was something else. It was a scraping sound, like nails against concrete. Slow, deliberate. Then a soft, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. "What is that?" Priya whispered, clutching Dev's arm. "Probably just some animal," Rohit said, but his voice wavered. The tapping stopped. Then we heard what sounded like a low moan. Not quite human, not quite animal. It echoed slightly, making it hard to pinpoint its origin. "We should get back in the car," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. No one argued. We quickly got back inside and locked the doors. The windows fogged up from our breathing, making it harder to see outside. The mist over the river had grown thicker, curling up over the sides of the bridge like ghostly fingers. "What's going on?" Aditya asked, his voice barely above a whisper. None of us had an answer. We sat in silence, listening. The sounds from below continued, scraping, tapping, moaning. Occasionally, we'd hear what sounded like footsteps on the bridge, but when we wiped the condensation from the windows and looked out, there was never anyone there. Rohit tried the engine every few minutes, but it wouldn't start. We checked our phones constantly, hoping for enough signal to call for help, but there was never enough. Maybe one of us should walk to get help, Sanjay suggested after about 30 minutes. Are you crazy? Vikram shot back. No one's going out there alone. Then two of us could go, Sanjay countered, but no one volunteered. The thought of walking along that dark bridge with those sounds coming from below was too terrifying. The minutes stretched into an hour. We talked in hushed voices, trying to rationalize what had happened. Maybe the man was a hallucination caused by the headlights reflecting off the mist. Maybe the sound was just the wind and water playing tricks on us. But we all knew what we had seen. A man had appeared in front of our car, out of nowhere. We had felt the impact, and now these sounds. At one point, I swear I saw a hand, pale and dripping wet, reach up over the side of the bridge, just at the edge of our headlight's beam. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell the others. They were scared enough. After what felt like forever, Rohit tried the engine again. This time it started immediately, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. We didn't question our luck. Rohit put the car in gear, and we drove off that bridge as fast as was safely possible. No one spoke until we were well past it. What just happened? Priya finally asked, her voice shaking. I don't know, Rohit admitted, but we're never taking this route again at night. We agreed unanimously. The rest of the drive home was tense and silent. When we reached our town, we dropped everyone off quickly. No one wanted to be alone, but we were all desperate to get home, to be somewhere safe and normal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing that figure in the road, hearing that thud, those sounds from beneath the bridge. I searched online for any accidents that had occurred on the Bhagirathi Bridge. There were several over the years, including a few suicides where people had jumped into the river. One story stood out from about 20 years ago. A man had been hit by a car while crossing the bridge late at night. The driver had stopped, but when they got out to check, there was no body. They assumed the man had fallen into the river. His body was never found. The next day at coaching class, none of us mentioned what had happened. It was as if we had an unspoken agreement not to discuss it, but I could see it in their eyes. They were all as disturbed as I was. We found a different route to take home after that, one that added almost 30 minutes to our journey, but avoided that bridge. No one complained about the extra time. It's been 6 months now, and I still don't have an explanation for what happened that night. Was it a ghost, some kind of mass hallucination, or something else entirely? The only thing I know for sure is that 7 people experienced the same inexplicable event, and none of us will ever cross the Bhagirathi Bridge at night again. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear those sounds from beneath the bridge, and I wonder if whatever made them is still there, waiting for its next victims to stop on that lonely stretch of highway. Story 19. I've never really told this to anyone outside my family. It's not something I talk about easily, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it myself. We moved into our house when I was 4, so it's basically the only home I remember. It's nothing special, just a regular 2-story in a quiet neighborhood. My parents were so proud when we first moved in because it was only built a couple years before we bought it. My dad always made jokes about how we wouldn't have to worry about old house problems or finding out someone died there or whatever, but something's not right with our house. It never has been. The first time I remember something happening, I was around 8. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like someone was watching me. You know that feeling where the hairs on your neck stand up? I opened my eyes and froze. There was this shadow or something by my window. Not like a normal shadow cast by a tree or something outside. This was darker, denser somehow, and it had a shape, kind of human-shaped, but not quite right. I couldn't move. I literally couldn't make myself move. It just stood there for what felt like forever, and then it started moving toward my bed. I remember trying to scream, but nothing came out. It got closer and closer until I could feel something like breath on my face. Cold, stale breath. I squeezed my eyes shut and eventually passed out from pure terror. When I woke up the next morning, I convinced myself it was just a nightmare. I didn't tell anyone. But then stuff kept happening. Like a few days after that first incident, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep when I heard this sound, like someone exhaling really slowly right next to my ear. I thought maybe it was just the heater or something, but it happened again and again. It had this rhythm to it, like breathing. I pulled the covers over my head and started crying. I was 13 by then, too old to run to my parents' room, or at least that's what I told myself. The worst night was about 6 months ago. I'm 16 now, so I was still 15 then. I had gone to bed around 11 after finishing some homework. I remember checking my phone. It was this completely normal Tuesday night. Nothing special. I fell asleep pretty quickly, but then, at exactly 3:45 in the morning, I know because I checked my phone, I felt something tapping on my back. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but it kept going. Tap, 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 like someone poking me with a finger, but when I rolled over, there was nothing there. I sat up and turned on my bedside lamp. My room was empty. I was about to lie back down when I felt my blanket being tugged. Not like it was sliding off the bed, but like someone was deliberately pulling it from the bottom. I yanked it back up, and that's when I felt it. A tap on the top of my head, like someone standing over me, touching my hair. I jumped out of bed so fast I knocked over my lamp. I stood in the middle of my room, heart pounding, looking everywhere. Nothing, no one. But the air felt thick, like when you walk into a room where people have been arguing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just sat in the corner of my room with all the lights on until morning. When I was in middle school, my little sister Lily and I shared a room. She's 4 years younger than me, and I always felt responsible for her, you know. One night when I was 13 and she was 9, we both woke up at the same time. It was like something had alerted both of us simultaneously. I looked over at her bed and saw her sitting up, staring at something near my bed with this look of absolute horror on her face. I followed her gaze and nearly peed myself. There was this figure crouching right next to my bed. It was this weird tan color, not like human skin, more like old parchment paper or something, and it was just watching me, not moving, just observing. I couldn't see a face exactly, but I could feel its attention on me. "Lily," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the thing. "Do you see that?" She started crying. Not loudly, just these soft, terrified sobs. "Uh-huh," she managed to get out, and then, as we both watched, it just sort of faded away. Not like it walked away or anything. It just gradually became less there until it wasn't. The next morning, neither of us wanted to talk about it. But later that day, when our parents weren't around, Lily crawled into my bed and asked in this tiny voice, "Is the tan man going to come back?" I didn't know what to tell her. We ended up pushing our beds together for the next week. My parents didn't believe us at first. Dad would say things like, "You girls have quite the imagination," or maybe cut back on the scary movies. Mom was a little more sympathetic, but still thought we were just freaking each other out with scary stories. That changed about 3 months ago. Mom woke me up early one Saturday morning. She looked exhausted with dark circles under her eyes. She sat on the edge of my bed and asked if I was still seeing things in the house. I hesitated, but finally nodded. "Your father and I saw something last night," she said, her voice shaking a little. She told me they'd both woken up around 2 in the morning. On top of their dresser, which is like 5 feet tall, there was this gray figure crouching there, not standing, crouching, like it was trying to make itself smaller. Mom said it just stayed there, watching them. Dad tried to turn on the light, but his hand was shaking so bad, he knocked the lamp off the nightstand. The figure didn't react to the noise or anything, it just kept watching them. "How long was it there?" I asked. "About 30 minutes, Mom said. We just lay there, frozen. I kept thinking it would do something, but it just watched. Then it was gone, like it just blinked out of existence. 2 nights later, they saw something else, a bigger, darker figure that slowly walked across their room and then vanished through the wall. Not like it walked through the wall, it just disappeared when it reached it. After that, they started taking Lily and me seriously. We sat down as a family and compared notes on what we'd been experiencing. That's when we realized this wasn't just random occurrences. This was happening regularly, like every week or two. And it wasn't just one entity or whatever you want to call it. There seemed to be different ones with different, behaviors. The tan one that Lily and I saw, the grey one my parents saw on the dresser, the dark one that walks, and whatever invisible thing taps and pulls at me in the night. I tried to do something about it. I read online about cleansing spaces, so I bought some sage and tried to smudge the house when my parents were at work. I felt stupid doing it, walking around with this smoking bundle of herbs, telling whatever was in our house to leave. It didn't work. If anything, the activity increased for a while after that, like I'd pissed them off. The weird thing is, despite how terrifying these experiences are, nothing has ever actually hurt any of us. They just watch. It's like living in some kind of bizarre fish tank where these things come to observe us. That's almost worse in a way. Like, what are they waiting for? What do they want? We've talked about moving, but we can't afford it right now. Dad lost his job last year and just found a new one, and Mum's hours at the hospital got cut back. Plus, who would buy our house if we told them the truth? And if we didn't tell them, what kind of people would that make us? So we're stuck here with them. The Watchers, that's what we call them now. Not ghosts or spirits or demons, just the Watchers. We've developed this weird system of coping. We text each other when something happens. We leave lights on in the hallways. Lily sleeps in my room when our parents work night shifts. Last week was the most recent incident. I was doing homework at my desk when my peripheral vision caught movement by my closet. I turned and saw this black mass, like a person-shaped hole in reality. It didn't move toward me or anything. It just stood there. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds before looking down at my phone to text my mom. When I looked back up, it was gone. The hardest part is not knowing why. Why our house? It's not even old. There's no tragic history here that we know of. The land was just a regular field before they built these houses. We're not special people, we're just normal. Mom's a nurse, Dad works in IT, I'm an average student, and Lily's in middle school now. There's nothing about us that should attract this kind of attention. Sometimes I wake up and for a split second, I forget about them. I just feel normal, safe. Then it all comes rushing back, the knowledge that at any moment I might look up and see one of them watching me, or feel those taps on my back or head, or hear that breathing when no one's there. I don't know if they'll ever leave or if we'll just have to live with this forever. I don't know if they'll always be content just to watch, or if someday they'll want something more. All I know is that my home doesn't feel like a home anymore. It feels like somewhere I'm being tolerated by things I don't understand. The worst thing? I'm starting to get used to it. And somehow that scares me more than the Watchers themselves. Story 20. I never thought I'd actually write this down, but the memories have been bothering me lately. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that mansion and how it just changed. I need to get this off my chest. I grew up in Millfield, a tiny town where everyone knows everyone else's business, the kind of place where the same families have lived for generations. On the north side of town stood the Harrington Mansion, this massive Victorian monstrosity that was probably beautiful once, but looked like something out of a Gothic novel by the time I was born. It wasn't just a house, it was the house, the landmark. 4 generations of Harringtons had lived there since it was built around 120 years ago. My connection to the place wasn't random. My mom had been friends with the foster daughter of Agnes Harrington, the last of the family to live there. Agnes was this old widow who'd lost her husband when I was still pretty young. Mom always described Agnes as this cold, stern woman. Strict, firm, and completely insensitive were her exact words. But that wasn't the Agnes I knew. I started visiting the mansion when I was about 11. Mom would drop me off for some reason I can't even remember now. Maybe she was helping Agnes with something, or Agnes was teaching me something. It's weird how those details fade. What doesn't fade is how that place felt. From the moment you stepped onto the property, something felt off. The mansion sat on what used to be acres of farmland and pine forest, but by the time I knew it, it was just the main house and a few scattered outbuildings, like the property had shrunk into itself. It was a two-story place with this weathered brick exterior and tall, narrow windows that never seemed to reflect sunlight properly. I only ever stayed on the first floor, the kitchen and this small rec room where Agnes would let me read or do homework. Never, not once, did I go upstairs. And it wasn't because Agnes told me not to. She never said that. I just didn't want to. Something in me knew better. The reputation of the place had always been kinda creepy. My mom told me how when she was a teenager, girls in the village would avoid walking past the mansion after dark. They'd take the long way home just to avoid it. They all said the same thing. They felt like they were being watched, not by Agnes or her husband, but by something else. Here's the thing, that feeling wasn't just at night. I felt it in broad daylight every single time I visited. I'd walk up the gravel path to the front door, and I swear to God, I could hear a second set of footsteps behind me. At first, I thought it was just an echo, so I'd stop, and the footsteps would stop at the exact same moment. Then I'd start walking again, and so would they. It was so subtle that I spent months convincing myself it was just in my head. The outbuildings were even worse. They had these big windows, but no matter what time of day it was, they looked completely black inside. Not dark, black. Like the darkness was a physical thing filling the space. Sometimes I'd catch what looked like movement inside them, just at the corner of my eye. But when I'd look directly, nothing would be there. Inside the main house wasn't much better. I always avoided using the bathroom there, even if I really had to go. Not because there was anything wrong with the bathroom itself, but because getting there meant walking past this huge hallway where the staircase to the second floor began. I never ever looked up those stairs, not once in all the years I visited. I just kept my eyes forward or down at the floor. I can't explain why, but I knew that whatever made the house feel so oppressive was upstairs. There was this mounted deer head in that hallway too. Agnes's husband had been a hunter apparently. That thing gave me the creeps because I swear the eyes followed me, not in the way that some paintings seem to follow you. This was different, more deliberate. Sometimes I thought I saw the head turn slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it. The whole property had this unnatural quiet to it, like sounds just died. Birds wouldn't sing once you passed through the gates. The wind seemed to hold its breath, and you never felt completely alone, even when you definitely were. Agnes would be in another room, and I'd feel someone standing right behind me. I'd feel their breath on my neck, but when I'd turn around, nobody was there. There was one particular stretch of the gravel walkway between two of the outbuildings that was the absolute worst. Walking that 20-foot section made me feel like someone was not just following me, but practically stepping on my heels. I'd feel this cold pressure right at my back, like if I slowed down even slightly, I'd bump into whatever was behind me. I started running that section, not caring if Agnes saw me and thought I was being childish. The weird thing is, Agnes never seemed bothered by any of it. She moved through that house like it was the most normal place in the world. She was proper, yeah, always dressed nice, even just to be at home. And she had these old-fashioned manners, but she was also kind to me. She'd make me cookies and tell me stories about the town from when she was young. Not at all the cold witch my mom had described. I sometimes wondered if we were talking about the same person. I remember asking her once, very casually, if she ever heard strange noises in the house. She just smiled this sad little smile and said, "Old houses settle, dear. They talk to us in their own way." That was it. No acknowledgement of anything unusual. The last time I visited Agnes was about a week before she died. I was 17 then, and I hadn't been to the mansion much in the previous year or so. Typical teenager, I guess. Too busy with my own life. but Mom insisted I go see her because she wasn't doing well. That last visit was the worst. The feeling of being watched was so intense I could barely focus on what Agnes was saying. The air felt thick, like right before a thunderstorm, but inside the house. And the silence, it was absolute. I couldn't even hear Agnes's old grandfather clock ticking in the hall, though I could see the pendulum swinging. Agnes died in her sleep a few days later. The whole town attended her funeral, not because everyone loved her, but because the Harringtons were Millfield royalty, and that's just what you did. I remember standing at the graveside, looking back toward the direction of the mansion, though you couldn't see it from the cemetery, and feeling this weird sense of anticipation, like something was waiting. Here's where it gets really strange. About 6 months after Agnes died, a new family moved into the mansion, a woman with 3 kids and this energetic spaniel dog. I was home from college on break and curiosity got the better of me. I walked by the property one afternoon, expecting to feel that same old dread. Nothing, absolutely nothing. The house looked normal, just an old, slightly run-down mansion. The windows reflected sunlight. Birds were singing in the trees on the property. The outbuildings looked ordinary. I could actually see inside them as I passed. That stretch of gravel path, just a path. I stood there staring for so long that the new owner noticed me and came out to ask if I needed something. We got to talking, and I mentioned I used to visit Agnes. She invited me in for tea, and I almost said no out of habit. But I went in. The inside of the house was transformed. Not because they'd renovated, they hadn't had time yet. It was the same furniture, same layout, same everything. But the oppressive feeling was completely gone. The mounted deer head was still there, but it was just taxidermy. Nothing more. I even found myself looking up the staircase to the second floor, something I'd never done before, and it was just stairs. Just a normal upper level of an old house. The kids were running around, laughing. The dog was barking and playing. There was life and noise and light. I asked the woman, trying to sound casual, if she'd noticed anything strange about the house. She looked confused and said no, just that it needed some updating and the plumbing was a bit temperamental. I've spent years thinking about this. The only explanation I can come up with is that whatever was in that house, whatever presence or energy or whatever you want to call it, wasn't attached to the property itself. It was attached to the Harrington family. Maybe Agnes' ancestors had been waiting for her, and once she joined them, they all found peace. Maybe 60 years of whatever supernatural disturbance had been happening there finally ended. I still drive by the mansion sometimes when I visit my parents. It's just a house now, a big old house with a new coat of paint and a swing set in the yard. But sometimes, just for a second when I first glance at it, I think I see it the way it used to be. Dark and foreboding, with blackened windows and that feeling of being watched. Then I blink and it's normal again. I never told my mum about any of this. She'd probably say I was being dramatic or making it up, but I know what I felt in that house, and I know it's gone now. That's the part that convinces me I wasn't imagining things. If it had been all in my head, wouldn't I still feel it? Wouldn't my memories trigger the same fear? But they don't. Because whatever was there is gone. I still wonder about Agnes, though. Was she protecting me somehow? Did she know what was in her house? Was she part of it? I'll never know, but I hope she's at peace now, wherever she is. And I hope whatever was in that house is too. Story 21. I still get goosebumps thinking about what happened that Halloween night back in 2003. Chris and I were 16 then, always looking for ways to push boundaries and scare ourselves stupid. We were the type of kids who spent way too much time in the shadowy corners of the internet, back when it felt like the Wild West. You know, before everything got sanitized and corporate. It was about 2 weeks before Halloween when we found that website. I remember it clearly because I was at Chris's house in Oakville, hunched over his old Dell desktop. His parents had finally gotten broadband that summer, which meant we could actually explore without tying up the phone line. We were on some forum thread about paranormal stuff, clicking random links, when we landed on this site that looked straight out of the 90s. Black background, white text, red headlines. The URL was something weird with numbers and letters that didn't make sense. The homepage had this pulsing pentagram GIF and claimed to have authentic dark rituals and summoning spells collected from around the world. Most of the sites we'd found like this were obviously fake, made by other bored teenagers trying to freak people out, but this one felt different. The writing wasn't trying to be edgy or cool. It was matter-of-fact, almost academic, explaining the history behind different rituals and why certain ingredients or steps were necessary. "Dude, check this out," Chris said, clicking on a section labeled Audio Evidence. There were dozens of files, each labeled with dates and locations. Some claimed to be EVPs from haunted buildings, others were supposed exorcisms. We listened to a few, and I still remember this one recording of what sounded like a woman speaking in multiple voices at once. It wasn't like movie stuff with the deep demon voice. It was subtle, like her voice had echoes that were saying slightly different things than her main voice. I can't explain it right, but it made the hair on my arms stand up. "This is bullshit," I said, but I didn't really believe that. Something about it felt authentic in a way that scared me. Chris kept browsing the site and found a section specifically about Halloween rituals. "Look at this," he said, clicking on one called The Mirror Summoning. According to the site, Halloween was when the veil between worlds was thinnest, making it the only night certain entities could be contacted. This particular ritual claimed to let you summon a spirit that would show you glimpses of your future. "We should try it," Chris said with that stupid grin he always got when he had a bad idea. "Are you serious?" I asked, but I was already kind of into it. That was our dynamic. He'd suggest something reckless. I'd pretend to be the voice of reason, then go along with it anyway. We decided to print out the instructions, but Chris's printer started running out of ink halfway through. The last page came out with faded text that we could barely read. I remember joking that it was a sign from beyond, warning us not to do it. We should have listened to my stupid joke. Fast forward to Halloween night. I told my parents I was sleeping over at Chris's house. His parents were cool with having me over, and his dad even ordered us pizza before settling in to hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. Around 9:30, his dad announced he was going to bed, warning us not to stay up too late since it was a school night. "Make sure you turn off the porch light when you're done with the candy," he told us before heading upstairs. We waited about half an hour, handed out the last few pieces to some late trick-or-treaters, then turned off the porch light as instructed. But instead of playing video games like we'd normally do, we pulled out the printed ritual instructions. "You still want to do this?" I asked Chris, part of me hoping he'd chickened out. "Hell yeah," he said, grabbing a candle from the emergency supplies drawer in the kitchen. "We need a bathroom mirror, right?" According to the instructions, we needed to be in a small room with a mirror, a single candle, and complete darkness otherwise. The bathroom off the main hall was perfect. No windows, just the mirror above the sink. We went in together, locked the door, and set up the candle on the counter. Chris had the printout, squinting at the faded final page. "Okay, so we need to light the candle, turn off the lights, and then stare into the mirror while reciting the incantation 3 times, he explained. The incantation was in Latin or something similar, words that felt awkward in our mouths as we practiced them quietly. I remember feeling a mixture of excitement and dread as Chris flicked off the light switch, leaving just the flickering candle flame illuminating our faces in the mirror. "Ready?" Chris whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. We started reciting the words together, our voices barely above whispers. The candle flame danced as we spoke, casting weird shadows that made our reflections look distorted and almost alien. Nothing happened on the first recitation or the second. By the 3rd time through, we were speaking a bit louder, more confident, almost challenging whatever forces might be listening. When we finished, we stood in silence for what felt like forever, just staring at our reflections, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Nothing did. Well, that was anticlimactic, Chris finally said, reaching for the light switch. I let out a nervous laugh, feeling both relieved and disappointed. What did you expect? A ghost to pop out and say boo? We went back to his room, played some Halo, and eventually fell asleep, the ritual seemingly a bust. I remember feeling silly for being so nervous about it. Just another fake website with fake spells that bored teenagers like us fell for. But here's where it gets messed up. Fast forward about 2 weeks. It was a Friday night in mid-November 2018, and I was staying over at Chris's house again. We'd pretty much forgotten about the Halloween ritual by then, or at least we didn't talk about it. We stayed up late playing Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, talking about school drama, girls we liked, normal teenage stuff. Around 3 or 4 in the morning, we finally decided to call it a night. Chris had a futon in his room that I always slept on. We turned off the lights, said goodnight, and I was just starting to drift off when I heard it. A scratching sound, not like a mouse in the walls or anything small like that. This sounded like a large animal tearing at something. It was coming from somewhere down the hallway, maybe near the bathroom. "Chris?" I whispered, wondering if he heard it too. "I hear it," he whispered back, his voice tense. "What the hell is that?" The scratching continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was almost worse. I was straining to hear anything, my whole body rigid with fear. Then we heard something that still haunts me to this day. Children's laughter. Not loud, just quiet giggles, like kids trying to stifle their laughter during hide and seek. Chris's house was a single-family home. His parents were in their 50s. There were no children living there. "What the fuck?" Chris hissed, and I could hear him sitting up in bed. Before I could respond, we heard small footsteps, like a child running, going past Chris's door and down the hallway. Then more giggling, this time from a different direction. We both jumped up at the same time. Chris flicked on his bedside lamp, and I still remember the look on his face. Pale, eyes wide, looking exactly how I felt. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice cracking. I nodded, unable to find words. There was something profoundly unsettling about hearing children's voices and footsteps in a house where no children lived, at 4 in the morning. "Should we wake up your parents?" I asked. Chris shook his head. "My dad will kill us if we wake him up for nothing. Let's check it out first." In horror movies, this is where the audience screams at the characters not to investigate the creepy noise. But in real life, when you're terrified, sometimes you need to know what you're dealing with. Not knowing feels worse. Chris grabbed a baseball bat from his closet, and we ventured out into the hallway. The house was dead silent now. No scratching, no giggling, no footsteps, just the normal creaks of an older house and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. We checked every room on the second floor. His parents were sound asleep. The guest room was empty. The bathroom was exactly as we'd left it weeks ago after our failed ritual. Nothing seemed out of place or disturbed. Maybe it was just the house settling, I suggested, not believing it for a second. Both of us heard kids laughing. "Mark," Chris said, his voice still hushed but intense. Both of us heard footsteps. We went downstairs to check the rest of the house. Nothing was disturbed. All doors and windows were locked. No sign that anyone or anything had been there. When we got back to Chris's room, we left the light on and sat on our beds, neither of us wanting to sleep. "You don't think—" Chris started, then trailed off. "What? You don't think it had something to do with that ritual, do you? From Halloween?" I wanted to dismiss the idea, but I couldn't. The timing was too weird. "But nothing happened that night," I argued weakly. "Maybe it just took time," Chris said. "Maybe we did something wrong with the last page being all faded." We talked until the sun came up, trying to rationalize what we'd heard, but coming back to the ritual every time. When morning finally came, the house felt normal again in the daylight. Chris's parents didn't mention hearing anything unusual, and we didn't bring it up. I went home that afternoon, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd opened something that night in the bathroom, some door that wasn't meant to be opened. Nothing like that ever happened again at Chris's house, at least not when I was there. We never tried any other rituals, and we avoided talking about what happened for a long time, but every now and then, over the years, one of us would bring it up. Remember that night? And the other would just nod, because how could we forget? Chris's family moved away after we graduated high school. New people live in that house now. Sometimes when I'm back in Oakville visiting my parents, I drive past it. It looks normal, ordinary, but I still get this feeling in my gut when I see it, like something is watching me from one of those windows. I'm 36 now, with kids of my own. I've told myself 1,000 rational explanations for what happened that night. Maybe it was neighborhood kids playing a prank. Maybe it was our teenage brains playing tricks on us after too many horror movies and too little sleep. Maybe it was just the house making weird noises that our imaginations transformed into something sinister. But then I remember how clear those sounds were, how we both heard exactly the same thing. The specific quality of those giggles that sounded so young yet so wrong somehow. The deliberate way those footsteps moved down the hall. And I wonder what would have happened if that printer hadn't run out of ink, if we'd been able to read all the instructions properly, if we'd completed the ritual correctly. Sometimes I think we got lucky. Whatever door we cracked open that Halloween night, at least we didn't fling it wide. But sometimes, especially when I'm alone at night and my house makes an unfamiliar sound, I worry that door is still open, just a little, and something is still trying to squeeze through. Story 22. I've had sleep paralysis for as long as I can remember. Most people who've experienced it say it happens once in a blue moon, but for me, it's almost every single night. I'm 22 now, and I honestly can't recall what it's like to have a normal night's sleep. At this point, I should be used to it, right? But the truth is, I'm not. If anything, it's getting worse, and I'm starting to think what's happening to me isn't just regular sleep paralysis. I live in Pine Grove, a small community where everyone knows everyone. My apartment is nothing special, just a one-bedroom place with thin walls and creaky floors. My bedroom is simple: a bed, a nightstand, a dresser, and a small desk where I keep my laptop and journal. I've been documenting my episodes for months now, trying to make sense of what's happening to me. Last night was particularly bad, and I need to get this off my chest because I'm honestly terrified. I can't talk to my friends about it anymore. They either think I'm making it up or need serious psychiatric help. Maybe writing this out will help me process it or find someone who's gone through something similar. I've always had this weird thing where I can only sleep on my back or with my back against the wall. If I try sleeping on my stomach or side facing away from the wall, I get this overwhelming sensation of being touched all over my body. Fingers running down my spine, pressure on my shoulders, something tugging at my hair, and I know I'm alone in my room. I've checked 1,000 times, I've even set up cameras. Yesterday I had a normal day. Woke up around 7 in the morning, went to work at the local hardware store, came home around 6 in the evening, made some pasta for dinner, watched a couple episodes of a show I've been following, and started getting ready for bed around 11. I followed my usual routine, brushed my teeth, changed into my sleep clothes, just a t-shirt and sweatpants, and checked all the locks twice. I even looked under the bed and in the closet like I was a kid again. It sounds ridiculous, but it gives me some peace of mind. I got into bed around 11:30, positioning myself with my back against the wall. I left my bedside lamp on, I always do, and tried to relax. It took me a while to fall asleep, like always. The anxiety of knowing what might be coming makes it hard to drift off. I must have fallen asleep around midnight. What happened next is still so vivid in my mind that my hands are shaking as I type this. I woke up into that familiar state of paralysis. My eyes were open, but my body wouldn't move. This is the part that's different from what most people describe with sleep paralysis. I had no memory of where I was or how I got there. None. It's like my consciousness just appeared in this frozen body, and I had to piece together that I was in my bedroom. The room looked wrong though, distorted, like I was looking through a foggy window or underwater. The worst part is the certainty I feel that someone was just with me before I woke up. I can't see them anymore, but I know they were there, like when you walk into a room where people were just talking about you and they suddenly go quiet. That feeling. My bedside lamp was still on, but the light seemed to stop a few feet from the bed, like it couldn't penetrate the darkness in the corners of the room. And there was this pressure on my chest, not like someone sitting on me, which is what people usually describe with sleep paralysis, but more like a heavy blanket being slowly pulled up to my neck. I tried to move, to wiggle my fingers or toes, anything. Nothing responded. I tried to scream, but my mouth wouldn't open. My breathing became shallow, and I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, pounding but slowing down. Then came the worst part, the feeling that something was trying to force me back to sleep. It's hard to explain, but it was like a heaviness behind my eyes, a pull toward unconsciousness, and I absolutely knew, that if I fell back asleep, I might not wake up again. I fought it. I focused all my energy on staying conscious, on keeping my eyes open. The shadows in the corners of my room seemed to shift and deepen. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. There was a moment, just a split second, where I almost gave in. I was so tired of fighting, and the pull towards sleep was so strong. In that brief moment of surrender, my heart rate slowed dramatically. I could feel it. Thump, 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 with long pauses in between. My chest burned from lack of oxygen. My vision started to tunnel. That's when I felt it. Something cold and dry wrapped around my wrist. Not a hand, not exactly. Something more like fingers, but wrong. Too long, too thin, too cold. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. And the sensation was so real and distinct that even now, hours later, I can still feel where it touched me. That touch snapped me back. I fought harder against the paralysis, focusing all my will on moving just one finger. After what felt like an eternity, my pinky twitched, then my hand, then my arm. The paralysis broke suddenly, like a rubber band snapping, and I gasped for air, sitting bolt upright in bed. My room was normal again. The lamp cast its usual warm glow. The corners were just corners. I was alone. The clock on my nightstand read 3:27 in the morning. I got up, turned on every light in my apartment, and checked every room, every closet, under every piece of furniture. Nothing. I even went outside and walked around the building. Everything was quiet, normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, that something had almost succeeded in, what? Taking me? Killing me? This isn't the first time I've had an episode this intense, but they're getting more frequent and more real. After the first few really bad ones, I started researching and came across something called the hag, a phenomenon where people believe an evil entity visits them during sleep paralysis. People throughout history and across cultures have reported seeing an old woman or a dark figure sitting on their chest, choking them or trying to harm them. I've considered all the rational explanations. Maybe I have undiagnosed schizophrenia or extreme paranoia. Maybe it's just my brain misfiring as I transition between sleep states. But I've been to doctors. I've had sleep studies done. Everything comes back normal, except for the unusually frequent episodes of sleep paralysis note they always make. I started recording my episodes in a journal about 6 months ago, documenting every detail I could remember. I've shown these notes to friends who are skeptical, to people online who study sleep disorders, even to a local pastor once when I was desperate. No one has a satisfactory explanation. The rational part of my brain wants to believe it's just a sleep disorder. But the part of me that feels those fingers on my wrist, that feels my heart slowing down when I almost give in, that part knows better. Something visits me when I sleep. Something wants me to stop fighting and let go. Something wants me to die. After last night, I'm terrified to go to sleep again. It's 5 in the afternoon now, and I've been awake since that episode at 3:27 this morning. I've downed 4 cups of coffee and taken a cold shower. I'm sitting at my desk with all the lights on, writing this out because I don't know what else to do. The worst part is that I know I'll have to sleep eventually. I know I'll have to lie down, close my eyes, and wait for it to happen again. I know I'll wake up paralyzed, with no memory of where I am, feeling that something was just there with me a second ago. I know I'll feel that pressure trying to force me back to sleep, and I'll have to fight it with everything I have. I've tried sleeping pills, meditation, leaving lights on, playing background noise, having someone stay over. Nothing helps. It happens no matter what. The only thing that varies is how intense the episode is and how hard it is to break free. Last night was the closest I've ever come to giving in. I felt myself slipping away, felt my body shutting down. If that touch on my wrist hadn't jolted me back, I don't know what would have happened. Part of me doesn't want to find out, but another part wonders if giving in is the only way to end this. I know how this sounds. I know most people reading this will think I'm making it up or that I need psychiatric help. Maybe I do, but I'm not crazy, and I'm not making this up. Something is happening to me, something real, and I don't know how much longer I can fight it. Tonight I'm going to set up my phone to record me while I sleep. I've done it before and never caught anything unusual, but maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time I'll have proof that what's happening isn't just in my head. If anyone has experienced something similar or knows what might be happening to me, please reach out. I'm running out of options, and honestly, I'm running out of strength to keep fighting this every night. I don't think my sleep paralysis is just sleep paralysis anymore. I think something has found me, and I think it's getting impatient, and I'm terrified of what happens when it decides it's tired of waiting.